Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Awakened Alpha Quirks? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Chapter 1. Izuku woke up with a splitting headache and the niggling feeling that something was wrong. He cradled his head, getting up from his futon. Or rather, falling off his futon, which was no longer at the supposed height it had been. The last time he checked, his futon was on the floor. Why was it elevated off the floor? He blinked, bewildered. He'd grown out of his clumsy nature after hours and hours of training, so it was unlikely that his prepubescent clumsy nature had just suddenly returned without any warning. The hero squinted at the ceiling, trying to recall the last thing that happened. The last thing he remembered was coming back after taking out a villain and collapsing on his very fluffy and comfortable futon after a hectic day's hard work, and it was definitely on the floor. Izuku subconsciously scanned his surroundings, taking in familiar-looking walls. Something seemed to click in place. He frowned, eyes zeroing in on the All Might merchandise meticulously placed in the room. His eyes darted around the different merchandise and posters. This looked exactly like his room when he was still a teenager. Whoever brought him here sure did a good job. Not a detail was out of place. Not to mention, his room hasn't looked like this for years. Izuku stood up from where he had landed ungracefully on the floor. He was immediately hit with a sense of vertigo, causing him to wobble. He eyed his hands and legs. They looked shorter than before. He frowned, cataloging the paleness of his skin. His skin almost seemed smoother, if that was possible. They were an unfamiliar sight. His arms and legs were missing the scars he'd diligently collected over the years. The green-haired hero crossed the room carefully, standing in front of the mirror. What he saw there confirmed his niggling suspicions. His thoughts raced. This was how he looked exactly 14 years ago. His frown grew more pronounced, not liking where this was going. Actually, he looked taller than he remembered being? His muscles seemed firmer, and his cheeks didn't have as much baby fat as compared to before. Izuku approached his desk, flipping through the various notebooks that had been displayed in a nondescript manner. His mouth pulled into a flat line. Every single detail was perfectly preserved, down to the punctuation as well as the random scribbles and little drawings that he'd included. Nothing was out of place from what he could tell. He gently closed the book's cover. The little things were stacking up, and he wasn't quite sure whether he liked where this was heading or not. Had he been trapped in an illusion quirk? Or had he genuinely traveled back in time? Izuku pressed blunt fingernails into his hand, feeling the sting of pain. Then, the green-haired man reached out to pull open the drawer gently, taking out a penknife. He let it bite into his wrist, taking care to avoid cutting an artery, barely feeling the sting. But the thing is, there actually was a sense of pain, which an illusion would not be able to produce. He still had a couple of misgivings, so he placed a few cuts on his forearm in quick succession. When the pain flared a little more, he was somewhat convinced. If this was an illusion, then no matter how good the person got with their quirk, it wouldn't produce a continuous amount of pain, but rather, based on the number of cuts he'd made, the pain would subsequently flare and ebb as his brain tricked itself into imagining there was pain. So, he really had traveled back in time. But did he somehow get hit with someone's quirk, causing him to time travel? As far as he knew, there were no recorded quirks of someone who managed to induce time travel. But then again, quirks haven't actually existed for all that long, and genetics played a tricky part in how a person's quirks manifested. The resulting quirk in a child could be from one parent, both parents, skip a generation, or mutate in itself, forming a new quirk altogether. In fact, later down the line of his hero career, scientists made the discovery that all of the so-called quirkless people weren't actually quirkless at all. Their quirks had just manifested later than others, only after they hit or passed PBRY. These quirks were so subtle that most people would be hard-pressed to notice they were there at all. Izuku's lips curled into a fond smile at the memory his own quirk. It was something that required an iron grip, or it would be hard to control, but he'd managed it all the same. The cuts were bleeding sluggishly. He pulled out the first aid kit placed under his bed and treated them with antiseptic. He wasn't quite sure what he'd done with that penknife, so it was better not to take any chances. He tucked in the bandage, checking the calendar to check the date, and more importantly, the date he had to take his suppressants. He nodded. Good thing he checked. It was a Sunday, which was the day he usually took his weekly dose of suppressants. It wouldn't have mattered too much if he missed maybe a day or two, but he would rather not flaunt his pheromones. People stereotyped and put others into this little box of theirs, even in the presence of Quirks, which most of the pro-hero circle found utterly ridiculous. What did it matter what your secondary gender was when they would pound you into the ground all the same? Every pro-hero was on suppressants regularly, and even in villains, there was an even ratio of secondary genders. Civilians like to think that majority of heroes were alphas, but that couldn't be further from the truth. It wasn't hard to find omegas who went out to keep the peace all the same within the pro-circle. The only difference was that the public didn't know they were an omega, and just assumed they were alphas. In contrast, many civilians assumed that those who possessed healing quirks or worked in the hospital tended to be omegas with the occasional betas, but in fact, that field was actually dominated by a majority of alphas. Years ago, when quirks hadn't even been a blip on the radar, that may have been the case, but with the appearance of quirks, more and more alphas joined the hospital for the sheer reason that they would be able to keep a misbehaving patient in bed and scaring them into taking their medicine. It was both hilarious and sad how people were blinded by their misconceptions. Izuku hoped that this would slowly change over the course of time. It truly saddened him that there were people suffering due to misconceptions like these. Many were bullied for their secondary gender, their quirk, and for being quirkless. Many villains became villains precisely due to how society treated them, constantly putting them down. If society could just be a little more open-minded and treat everyone based on how they acted, not what their quirk or secondary gender said about them, there would be a much lower rate of villains in the world. Izuku sighed. He dug deep into the drawer, intending to access the hidden bottom, smiling wryly at his past self. He'd been so caught up in not appearing to be weak because he was an omega that he ended up going to such extreme lengths to hide what his secondary gender was. Of course, he hadn't learned till much later that he didn't need to be ashamed he was an omega. It didn't matter even if his secondary gender got out to the public that he was an omega. It would be a long and drawn-out process, but society would slowly let go of their stereotypes after he released to the public that he was an omega, not an alpha. The public outrage died after many. Other omega and beta heroes started coming forward and voluntarily revealing their secondary genders. To his surprise, he realized that there wasn't a hidden drawer. Had he just not made one yet? Izuku tried to recall whether or not he made the drawer before or after the first time he took suppressants. The bottle of suppressants was stood inside his drawer all the same, just that it wasn't hidden quite so well. He absent-mindedly popped 2 pills into his mouth, swallowing the pills dry as he thought about it. Then, his eyebrows furrowed slightly. These didn't taste like how he remembered them tasting. Alarmed, his eyes darted to the label on the bottle. Suppressants AC 1000. Izuku felt horrified. Had he just ingested suppressants for an alpha? Not just for any run-of-the-mill alpha, in fact, extra-strength suppressants for alphas over the scale of these were specially customized specifically for a person's body. The green-haired hero panicked slightly, not entirely sure what ingesting these would do to his immune system. He fell further into a panicked state when he thought about how these could potentially create a pseudo-heat. These would surely wreak havoc on his body and immune system. Then, the more logical part of his brain kicked in. Why would he have these in his drawer? Why weren't these hidden in a false bottom like he had done in his earlier years? How would he get his hands on this in the first place? Izuku calmed down as his mind fired these questions at him. He carefully studied the label on the bottle. It did in fact write on the bottle that it was for a Midoriya Eye, which was his name specifically. His younger self did not just pick these up along the street. Does this mean he hadn't traveled back in time? The discrepancies were starting to increase. On the surface, it looked like most of the things were the same, but there seemed to be some differences. He reached up to the shelf above his desk and pulled out the photo books from his childhood. The green-haired man flipped through the pages quickly, realizing that the order of the pictures the same. He was still friends with Kakin in earlier years, followed by a falling out, as seen by the lack of pictures of him and Kakin. Nothing seems to have changed from what I remember, just that the suppressants are different. Izuku frowned, thoughts racing. He definitely wasn't trapped in an illusion, so what was going on? Izuku's ears twitched when he heard footsteps approaching his room. They were familiar footsteps. A few knocks on his door, his mother's gentle voice was heard. "Izuku, didn't you tell me you had to leave half an hour ago?" The green-haired man quickly opened the door for his mother, smiling at her. She looked so much younger than he remembered. He felt guilty. She'd gone through a lot of stress during his hero career. Hopefully he would be able to relieve some of her guilt in the future. He loved his job too much to do anything else, and he felt bad about that. He wanted to help people, but he also hurt his mother in the process. "I'll be going soon," he said, pausing before he decided to bite the bullet. "Mom, are these suppressants the right ones?" he asked, handing her the bottle. She looked at the bottle, reading the label. "Yes, they are." "Is something wrong?" she asked, looking concerned. She spotted the white bandages on his left arm. "What happened to your arm?" Izuku took the bottle back from her, looking a little strange. "No, they're fine," he said, feeling out of sorts. "I just accidentally gave myself a slight cut just now. It's not even bleeding. This may sound strange, but I'm an alpha, right?" He deliberately asked that question. If his conjectures were true, then he wasn't sure what to do. Things seemed to be leaning in that direction. Customized pills were expensive. Very expensive. It was a good thing that the government covered the cost until they were able to start working, but it also meant that it was rather unlikely that the bottle would have the wrong prescription written on it. His mother's concerned look immediately deepened. "Of course. Did something happen? Did you get hit by a quirk or something on the way here?" No, he replied reflexively, hoping to alleviate her worry as soon as possible. "It's just that I had a strange dream where I was an Omega," he said, lying through his teeth. "Oh," she said, letting out a light laugh. "I was worried for a moment there." "Well then you better get going soon. Make sure you take care of that cut properly. Or go get it healed from Recovery Girl." Izuku smiled at her, adoration for her filling him. She was still so gentle and concerned about him all the time. According to her, mothers never stopped worrying. Her concern gave him a warm, fluffy feeling. It felt like he was basking under the sunlight on a cold winter day. In order not to worry her further, he quickly left the house carrying his backpack. There was nothing inside it other than a few notebooks that had already been placed inside. Along the way to the dormitories, he nodded to people along the way, smiling at them, subconsciously activating his quirk and keeping it on a low simmer. He was so used to using his quirk that it had already become second nature to him. Most of the time, he forgot he was even using it and actually had to put in some effort to rein it back in. Looks like he could use his quirk already, even though he's still in the midst of PBR2I. He absent-mindedly entered the dormitories, entering his room. It was a good thing he hadn't met any of his friends along the way, or anyone he recognized. He was still processing things. He wasn't quite sure how he made it back to the UA dormitories. Probably his subconscious guiding him. The green-haired future hero silently lay down on his bed in a daze. Everything that happened to him so far suddenly came crashing down. He hoped he was having a dream, but he knew he was just delaying the inevitable. You don't feel pain in dreams. He wasn't dreaming, he wasn't in an illusion, and he definitely hadn't time-traveled. It seems more like he'd entered a parallel dimension or alternate universe. He was probably stuck. Quirk or not, the fact that he was here had already created a split in the universe. There was probably another 10 other dimensions where he hadn't hopped to that were all embarking on different paths. Izuku sighed and he mourned. He mourned for the future that would never happen, for the past that would never exist, and the friends he had made. Heroes he'd met and lost, his mother who would never be the same as the one in his memory. Everyone existed here, but they weren't his friends. They weren't his loved ones, and they would never be the same. He didn't know if his appearance had created a difference already, just like how a butterfly's wings flapping could create a whole natural disaster. Izuku groaned and scrubbed at his face, rolling over in his bed. His mind was throwing all the different things that could happen for the worse at him. The sound of rattling pills brought him out of the negative feedback that his mind was feeding him. He glanced down at the bottle of suppressants and let out a hollow laugh. Of course, there was that. He was an alpha now. He'd gone from being an omega to an alpha. Who knows the things that could change because of that? Some things would never happen and some things would. He wasn't sure what was going to happen. Midoriya Izuku was an alpha. An alpha. Not just any alpha. His customized pills literally screamed at him. That he was one of the alphas that he'd only read about in his previous life. He was literally part of the 0.01% of alphas on the alpha scale. How strange that his alternate self was so high on the alpha scale. He'd been an omega around the middle to lower range in his dimension, so it was strange that his alternate self ranked so highly. You'd think he'd just change secondary genders and stay around the same ranking, but apparently the universe worked in strange ways. Maybe there was another alternate self of his out there that was a beta as well. Izuku silently screamed into his pillow, venting all the negative emotions that had invaded him. If his pillow was slightly wet, he was sure no one would fault him. He'd practically lost everything after all. He felt better now that he'd gotten all the negative feelings out. Izuku got up and placed the bottle on his desk. Izuku smiled and felt hope for a better future. Perhaps he would be able to change some things for the better now. Maybe the previous Izuku was gone, but he'd live his current life to the fullest so that he had as little regrets as possible. For the both of them. The green-haired teen fell back onto his bed. What would being an alpha feel like? Izuku let out a slight laugh. Who else would be able to say they know what being another secondary gender feels like? Izuku stretched on the bed, feeling better about everything. He was still sad that he'd left his family and friends behind, but another version of them existed here. He'd try his best to treat them as separate people and try not to assume, but if he could help them, he wouldn't hold back. He smiled. The feeling of hope and anticipation for the future bloomed within his chest. Creator's thoughts. Rxel. What I had in mind for the alpha-omega scaling is 1 to 199 low, 200 to 399 medium low, 400 to 599 medium, 600 to 799 medium high, 800-1000 high, 1000 plus off the charts. Suppressants AC 1000 refers to U for alpha, C for customized, and because the scientists just liked to make sure they covered everything, they also stuck the number 1000 behind it. In the case of an omega, it would end up being OC 1000. 13 comment. Send gift. Chapter 2. Izuku checked the calendar again. The school week would be resuming tomorrow. He felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He wasn't quite sure how he would handle seeing a familiar face. Would things be different? The green-haired teen firmly put the thought away. They may not have the same memories anymore, but they were still his friends. He still cared for them, though they may be an alternate self in an alternate universe. The most pressing question was, should he tell anyone that he's not the Midoriya Izuku of this world? He liked his lips, stopping himself from biting on his bottom lip. It was a tell he was reluctant to show, but it was hard to train himself out of the habit. Would people even believe him, though? What if word got out and villains ended up kidnapping or threatening those people around him? Honestly, he wasn't even sure if what would happen in the future would happen again. It most likely wouldn't. He couldn't do everything the same, and he didn't want, nor have intention to as well. Izuku sighed. At least he'd broken his habit of mumbling out loud, even if the tirade still continued in his mind. Mind over matter. He refused to believe he couldn't break his telling habits. He got up from the bed to riffle through his desk. Homework. He put it aside. He knew he already finished doing it before the school break ended, having done it on the very day school was let out. A couple of fan letters addressed to him, which were bundled up carefully. He smiled. He always appreciated his fans. They were the ones who made his job worth it. He wanted to help others who couldn't help themselves. Marginally tired green eyes locked onto the secondary gender report kept below the pile of papers. He read through the report seriously, trying to see if he could glean anything else of importance. It looked quite standard, considering his alpha scaling was off the charts. He frowned slightly, seeing the last note on the report was that he should have an eye kept on him in case of anything that couldn't be predicted because of his scaling. Izuku placed the reports down and scanned through the rest of the things in his desk. He made haste out of his room. Now that he roughly figured out the timeline, he had things to do. He should do them sooner rather than later. His eyes glittered. He had an idea in the past that might have been able to help All Might, but by that time, although the doctors had deemed his idea plausible, it had already been too late. No time like the present. First, he had to go request an absence of leave from the school. Izuku walked down the hallway of the dorm, heading towards the administration office. His eyes traced the walls and doors of the dorms, taking in their appearance. He felt like he was taking a trip down memory lane. He hadn't seen the building like this for a few years, other than in pictures. It had a complete renovation because some freshman accidentally caused it to crumble down, which was a laugh, because if it could handle Kaken, then he thought it could have handled anyone else, but apparently not. A nostalgic smile had slipped onto his lips without his realization. He missed the light-hearted days where he could mess around with his friends and classmates in the dorm. Aizawa-sensei's hidden smiles and his low-key messing around, All Might's earnestness when teaching, his dramatics and all. His walking speed unintentionally slowed down, subconsciously influenced by his sentimental feelings. He couldn't help the smile that crept up on his face. Izuku suddenly stopped. There was a scent in the air. It smelled delicious. Something about it pinged on his radar, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Does this mean it's from someone he knew? Izuku shook his head. The smell was doing something to him. It seemed like his logical thought process had gone out the window. This was the 3A dormitories, so of course it was highly plausible that it was someone he knew. Did changing from an Omega to an Alpha have that much of a difference? Honestly, he thought that it was just the biological functions that changed. He didn't think that it would be able to alter his psychological state that drastically. Izuku swallowed. His mouth was watering. It just smelled so good. He felt the urge to bite something. The green-haired teen pinched his cheek to snap himself out of it. What was happening to him? Izuku grit his teeth and tried to shove down the surging instincts within him. He'd be dead if these instincts got the better of him. He was always perfectly in control of his secondary gender. Being an alpha would not change this, damn it. Before he realized it, his feet were already moving without him being conscious about it, heading in the direction of the delicious smell. Something deep inside him was snarling, growling. Izuku's lips twitched. Was this an alpha instinct? The smell continued to get stronger. As he turned the corner, his eyes landed on a familiar figure. Aizawa-sensei? He murmured, inwardly shocked. He took in a steadying breath and regretted it instantly as the smell only got more intense the longer he breathed it in. He almost felt like a drag addict getting his fix. Izuku subconsciously liked his lips, swallowing. His heart was beating a mile a minute. His throat felt dry. That something that was screaming deep inside him was hammering on his cage, crying and screaming. Shoyuta turned around, recognizing his student's voice. "Oh, hey kid," he said, looking lazy and perpetually tired as he took in his student. He'd gotten slightly taller compared to the last time he'd seen him. Izuku made sure he would be able to talk without stuttering before he replied. "Aizawa-sensei, can I have a moment with you?" Shoyuta frowned behind the mass of cloth that wound around his neck, inwardly wondering what was going on. Midoriya seemed a little different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. He was different but the same. His eyes still seemed as sincere as ever, however, so he'd give him the benefit of doubt. He led his problematic student down the hallway into an unused room. As he turned around to ask what his student wanted to talk about, he saw a flash of green before his back suddenly collided the door. Slightly blindsided, he was about to use his quirk reflexively before he realized Midoriya was pressed flush against him. "What?" he blurted out. This was proceeding out of his expectations. If it was a villain masquerading as Midoriya, then he or she would probably be trying to kill him. If it was the real Midoriya, then he wouldn't be doing this. What was going on? Izuku breathed. He slammed a hand on the other side of Aizawa-sensei's head, having to do something to stop his hand from reaching out for his teacher. He struggled inwardly with the new instincts inside of him, never having had to deal with this before. He didn't know what the alpha inside of him was screaming about, but his teacher just smelled so good. The other's alpha pheromones were sending shivers down his spine. Izuku tried to get a grip on himself, reflexively breathing to try and calm himself before he realized his mistake. The green-haired teen immediately lost the battle and buried his nose in his teacher's neck, unable to get enough. His throat felt extremely dry. He wanted to sink his teeth into his teacher's neck and claim him for himself. He wanted to leave his scent on him, wanted their scents to blend together until no one else would recognize their individual scents. He wanted to dominate. "Sensei, you smell so good." Shoyuta froze, his body going rigid as his most problematic student buried his nose where his bonding gland was before brushing soft lips on it. He had to shove his instincts down, his eyes going wide. Comment. Send gift. Chapter 3. Midoriya, Shuoda said in a steady, no-nonsense voice. There was an underlying tightness and wariness in the undercurrents of his tone. Get a hold of yourself. His posture was tensed. He was ready to immobilize his student anytime if he made any sudden motions. He didn't want to hurt him, but if he was going to persist, then he had no choice. The green-haired teen being so close to his bonding gland set off a mixture of different deep-sated instincts within him. He couldn't differentiate them from each other, and he had no idea where each one ended and began. They started mixing together in a jumble, leaving him conflicted and confused. What did his body want? Izuku felt like he had a bucket of cold water splashed over him. He almost tripped over himself trying to scramble away from his teacher. Oh God, what had he just done? The X-Omega slowly backed himself into a corner of the room, the furthest he could put himself from his teacher. He didn't want to chance anything. Sure, he'd managed to get himself under control at the last moment, but putting himself that close to the source was just a disaster waiting to happen. Izuku took a steadying breath, momentarily forgetting about the source of his troubles, and once again regretting his lack of foresight. Were alphas supposed to smell this good? He'd wondered if changing from an omega to an alpha would have any side effects, but frankly, alphas had smelled attractive to him just a mere 24 hours ago. He thought that might have changed somewhat since he'd transmigrated into an alpha body. Good to know he was wrong. Izuku thought back to the past few hours. Sure, it seemed like his sense of smell had heightened as compared to before, but when he had met those people on the street, they hadn't set him off like how Aizawa-sensei had set him off just moments earlier. Was there a reason for that? The green-haired teen stumbled as a wave of dizziness hit him. Startled, Shoyuta barely managed to use his support item to grab his student before he hit the ground. He didn't know what the F had just happened, but he still had his dignity as a teacher to uphold. Shoyuta walked forward to check on his struggling student. What's wrong? Izuku brought up his hand to try and block some of the scent from addling his brain even further. I don't know. I just felt a wave of dizziness. The moment Izuku acknowledged the dizziness, it felt like everything wrong with his body suddenly made itself known to him. It felt like a surge of everything and nothing all at once. He felt a bone-deep tiredness washing over his body, as well as a heat that was building up deep within him. He felt both lethargic and felt like he was filled up with energy at the same time. It felt strange having two contradicting feelings clash with each other. It almost felt like when he was in heat. But he'd never had a heat as intense as this. He was an alpha now. Does this mean he's in rut? But he took his suppressants just moments earlier. They should already be working. He felt rather indignant. This wasn't supposed to have happened. He was just supposed to have found Aizawa-sensei, get permission for a short break, gather some information, and come back like nothing happened. Everything was spiraling out of control. Izuku felt resigned to his fate. He buried his face in the soft cloth, and for the nth time that day, regretted it. It felt like the heat was burning him up from the inside. His inner alpha was pounding at the cage keeping him locked up. The softness brushing against his cheek was quite literally infused with Aizawa-sensei's scent from how long he'd had it wrapped around his neck. Izuku breathed with the effort from ripping his face away from the cloth. The green-haired alpha would have slumped to the ground without the support of Aizawa-sensei's cloth. He didn't know if he was thankful or not. On one hand, it was helping him. On the other, It was also giving him some other troubles. Shoyuta politely coughed and looked up to the ceiling for strength. Kid, he started before stopping, not quite sure how to put it. You might want to take care of that. Izuku shot his homeroom teacher puzzled eyes. What did he mean? He followed Aizawa-sensei's gesture and looked down. He was mildly surprised by the bnur he was popping. He thought he'd be more embarrassed, but he was feeling strangely detached right now. He felt kind of floaty and high. Kind of like when he had been shot up with painkillers. He felt cool hands on his forehead. You're probably going into a rut. Haven't you been taking suppressants, kid? Izuku couldn't stop himself from nuzzling the hand, his mind automatically falling back onto Omega reflexes. The alpha inside him railed at this. He whined when the hand retreated, eyes popping open from the loss, his inner alpha growling at him. The green-haired alpha's eyes darted to his teacher's face. He swallowed. He really wanted his teacher. In him, under him, he wanted to wreck the other's stone-cold expressions and add a little color to his cheeks. Shoyuta shivered as his student's hungry eyes landed on him. It felt akin to a hungry predator locking eyes on its prey right before it would be devoured. Midoriya's eyes were particularly intense. He'd never seen them look that way before. The way he was looking at him was a mixture of lust and hunger. His heart was pounding loudly, though you couldn't tell from his expression. The teacher startled slightly as his student spoke up. Sensei, Izuku purred, his voice going low and stuck. Shoyuta unintentionally loosened the cloth wrapping around his student due to a slight imbalance in his mental state. Midoriya always looked so innocent for an alpha, and everyone had thought he would present as an omega, so it came as a shock to all of them, sans for Bakugo, of all people, who sported that smug look for a month whenever someone looked the green-haired teen's way in shock. He may or may not have been waiting to see if he would present as an omega. If he had been harboring some hopes, no one could blame him. After all, practically everyone was in love with the green-haired teen, or at least had some sort of attraction to him. They were all drawn to him like moths to flame, and they didn't mind it one bit. Izuku noticed that the bindings around him had been loosened. He stalked forward, intent on getting nearer to his teacher. He took a step forward as Aizawa-sensei took a step backwards. Shoyuta actually let his startled expression show on his face when he felt his back hit the wall. The inner alpha inside Izuku purred at the look, feeling pleased. Sensei, won't you spend my rut with me? The new alpha said, hooking a finger into his teacher's belt, giving it a light tug. He smiled up at his teacher, making sure to add a little sheen into his eyes, placating his teacher's alpha instincts by acting coy. Shoyuta blurted out, his mind short-circuiting. Izuku made sure to press closer, heeding his alpha instincts. He brushed a lingering kiss onto his teacher's cheek. Please, sensei, he purred out, sounding slightly out of breath. Shoyuta groaned, his head hitting the door with a thump. What Midoriya was doing to him was sending him mixed signals. He was an alpha, but he also wasn't quite acting like one. It was sending the deeply ingrained instincts in him around in circles. It was just so sudden. He didn't have any time to think it through, and Midoriya wasn't helping by peppering kisses on him. And that hand. Izuku managed to get the shirt untucked from Aizawa-sensei's belt, unabashedly running his fingers up the other's stomach, tinging his abs with fleeting, teasing touches. Shoyuta was unable to stop the gasp that was ripped from his lips. He subconsciously pulled the teen closer to him before realizing what he'd done when he smirked up at him like the cat that got the canary and blamed it on the dog. The messy-haired teacher groaned again, inwardly scolding himself. He opened his mouth to reply teenager. Comment. One comment. Send gift. Chapter 4. Stop joking, Shoyuta grit out, his voice rough from the suppression of his instincts. Find someone else nearer your age group. Shoyuta inwardly cursed when Midoriya's eyes started filling up with tears, immediately regretting the sharp tone of his voice. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the sight. His eyes were glittering, reflecting the light from above. Shuta's inner alpha felt a strong need to hug the other close and comfort him. The teacher struggled with himself, pushing his alpha under. He tried to meld into the door, wishing he could just phase through it. It was exceedingly hard to get himself under control. Izuku let out a little whine, pressing closer. He let a tear roll down his cheek. If you thought he was going to waste all those years as an Omega without milking it for all it's worth, you'd be dead wrong. Please, Sensei? Izuku asked with a little hitch in his voice, appealing to the other's baser alpha instincts. His thumb started tracing little circles into the side of his teacher's waist. Shoyuta groaned inwardly. Izuku's little motions were driving him down the path of insanity. No, he corrected himself. Midoriya. It's Midoriya. It was a wonder that he had resisted this long. Then, he wondered if it would be so bad just to spend a single rut with Izuku before shaking himself out of it. He couldn't give in now. This couldn't be remotely healthy. Anyhow, Midoriya had never shown any interest before this, so this was probably his rut speaking for itself, right? The more he stared at Midoriya's tear-stained face, the more his control over himself fractured. It started having hairline fractures, before it was coming off in little chunks instead. There were tears clinging stubbornly to the other's eyelashes. He forced his eyes to look beyond his student's face with a tremendous amount of effort that left him breathing lightly. That was more difficult than I thought it would be. Izuku stopped with his little ministrations, the tears slipping down his face increasing in number. He silently stepped away from his teacher, retrieving his hand. He seemed to draw into himself a little, ignoring whatever his alpha instincts were screaming at him. He might have only started this because his inner alpha reacted to how Aizawa-sensei smelled, but he didn't mind spending a little quality time with him. He might have idolized All Might, but Aizawa-sensei was the one he had a crush on when he was younger. The man had been very gentle when he refused him after graduation, but his crush still lingered on for a time. He thought he had finally left behind any non-platonic feelings for the other behind, but evidently not. His new body seemed to agree. Izuku sniffed, looking devastated. Shoyuta felt a snarl from his inner alpha, screaming that he wasn't being a good alpha. It made his heart wrench that he was the one who put the tears there in the first place, but he was determined that the other should spend his rut with someone his age group. Who wanted to spend days on end with an overaged alpha? Please, Sensei. I just didn't want to spend my first time with someone I didn't trust, that's all. The kid seemed to have come to his senses. Shoyuta pushed himself off the door slightly, ready to leave the room, before the words he just heard hit him. First time? Virginity. Shuta's heartbeat sped up as his inner alpha started redoubling its efforts to get out. He didn't do anything to stop his student when he drew closer again, the tears clinging to his eyelashes looking like crystals. His freckles were dusted with a light blush, and his bottom lip was being bitten in nervousness. Please, came a fragile voice. Something in Shoyuta broke. A growl rumbled deep in his throat, a pressing need appearing within him. He wanted to. He wanted Izuku. He wanted to show him how good it felt, wanted to worship his body, wanted to make him feel so good he cried. Izuku tried to draw away when he was stopped by his teacher's arm wrapping around him, pressing the two of them together. The ex-hero did a little mental fist pump. Little Omega tricks that were passed down through the hero community sure worked most of the time. Fine, said Shoyuta, looking like the words were causing him great pain. Let's go then. The smile Izuku shot him made him feel like the sun had come out from hiding behind the clouds. The tears in his eyes had disappeared, but drops still clung to his eyelashes. All of a sudden, he felt better about his decision. Who knew what would happen if he just left him to his devices? He might end up hurting himself. The student and teacher pair left to head to Shuta's living quarters. He unlocked the door, stepping aside for his student to go inside. He hesitated before deciding to leave straight away to buy some supplies first. I'm going to go pick up a few bottles of water and some food. You can wait inside and get ready first. The moment the door closed behind, Izuku smirked. Looks like he hadn't lost his touch. He could still get alphas eating out of the palm of his hand. He opened the door to the bedroom, the heady scent of his teacher's musk hitting him in full force. A growl rumbled deep in his chest, Rxel shooting through his body. Izuku liked his lips, looking forward to what would happen soon. He casually stripped off his clothes, intentionally leaving them in a pool in front of the bathroom door. He stepped into the bathroom, cold tiles calming him somewhat. The ex-hero turned on the water, causing him to groan as the cold water hit his body. It felt like forever since he last took a shower, even though it's only been a few hours. He quickly washed and lathered everything, washing it off. However, his Rxel didn't flag at all, mainly because the shampoo and body wash smelled enough like Aizawa-sensei that it didn't help calm him at all. In fact, he felt harder than ever. He heard the front door open and shut. Izuku turned off the shower and stepped out into the bedroom, toweling himself somewhat dry before working on his hair. He headed out to meet Aizawa-sensei casually, surprised he was back so fast. Izuku heard the sound of something hitting the floor, causing him to look at his teacher. The man looked stunned. The ex-hero's sharp eyes caught sight of the man's Adam's apple bobbing up and down as he swallowed. Shoyuta couldn't contain his shock when his student just walked out with barely anything on. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the glorious sight of the rippling muscles and beads of water still clinging onto the body in front of him. His mouth dropped open a little in shock when his eyes reached the little towel still wrapped around Izuku's hips. His Rxel was making its presence evident. The green-haired teen smirked at him, causing his hackles to rise as his inner alpha felt slightly challenged. Then, any thought was wiped from his mind as his body hit the bed, startling him. Izuku loomed above him, looking perfectly in control. He looked hungry and ready to pounce. "Shoyuta," he purred, his first name coming out from his student's lips giving him shivers down his spine. It felt deliciously wrong. "Are you ready?" Comet. 3 Comet. Send gift. Chapter 5. Chapter 5, NSFW. Shoyuta stared at his student in muted shock. His brain hadn't processed what just happened. On the way back, he'd been thinking about how he would sit the other down to civilly discuss what would happen. Obviously, that was going out the window now. Izuku's inner alpha purred at the look of shock on his teacher's face. He wanted to pull all different kinds of expressions out of his teacher. He nuzzled the other's cheek with his own, feeling like spoiling the other alpha. The older man's stubble pricked him slightly, but he paid no attention to it. The green-haired teen pressed feather-like kisses to the other's face, feeling the need to smother the other under affection. His attention was instantly drawn back when he felt the starting motions of the alpha under him trying to flip them over. A growl rumbled at the back of Izuku's throat, liking a line up the other alpha's neck. Shoyuta gasped, feeling oddly vulnerable in his position. He tensed before slowly relaxing under the other's ministrations. The gentle nips and licks to the side of his throat was undeniably going to leave marks of proof. The alpha that was usually roaring and ready to go was strangely quiet for once. Once he stilled under the body above him, Izuku returned to giving him affectionate kisses. "Shoyuta," his student murmured against his lips, voice low and green eyes were half-lidded and gazing intensely into his. Shoyuta inwardly shivered. His green-haired student's voice reminded him of silk. His heartbeat sped up as his lower half started taking a very enthusiastic interest in the events transpiring. Izuku grinned, feeling the effect he was having on his teacher pressing up against his leg. He reached down to palm at it, drawing a gasp from the other's lips. The green-haired ex-hero immediately leaped into the older man's mouth, his tongue exploring the wet cavern hidden. Shoyuta groaned as the hand deviously wiped away whatever thoughts he had, sinking him into an ocean of pleasure. He felt like he was slightly tipsy after a few rounds of drinks. He tried to battle back against the tongue invading his mouth but ultimately lost as the hand rubbing his Urkton steadily drove him insane. He felt the blow to his ego. Was he seriously losing against aversion? Izuku broke away and drew back a little, his inner alpha purring at the sight before him. The other alpha's normally indifferent expression was broken by the pink flush dusting his cheeks. His lips were shiny and lightly swollen from what they had been doing earlier. The older alpha was still breathing a little, his pupils blown wide. "So cute, sensei," he teased, drawing a deeper flush to the other's cheeks. Izuku watched more carefully as he felt the man's Urkton twitch in interest at his words. The green-haired teen mentally catalogued the reaction, wanting to experiment later. Izuku tugged on the other's belt, letting go of the other's clothed Urkton. "Aren't you going to undress for me?" Shoyuta groaned, his head thumping onto the blankets under him. This problem student was going to be the death of him. He felt flustered, losing control of himself that easily. He had been led around the nose. Was Izuku really a version? The teacher pushed a hand on his student's chest, having to plaster himself to the other to get up as the green-haired teen didn't move at all. Yuta inaudibly swallowed as the teen's lips pulled into a smirk, making him look devilish. Izuku slid off his teacher, seating himself on the bed as he watched the little strip show his teacher was giving him. His mouth watered at every inch that was being slowly exposed. He wanted to leave his marks on the pristine-looking skin. The older alpha was pale under his clothes, being covered up most of the time. The green-haired teen pressed up against the other's back the moment the shirt hit the floor, running cool fingers up the other's abdomen. He buried his nose in the other's bonding gland, the scent making his teeth itch. He wanted to bite down, but he stopped himself. He didn't have permission, and he didn't know if the other even wanted him to. Izuku traced the faint, silvery scars littered on the other alpha's torso, wondering how he got them. He wanted to leave marks on this man as well. The ex-hero felt the slightest tremble under his fingertips, realizing that his teacher had stopped stripping. He smirked into the other's neck. "Need some help?" he asked, unbuckling the belt. He gave a tug, the belt sliding out in a smooth motion, hitting the ground with a light clink. Izuku expertly unbuttoned the other's breeds one-handed, the other still playing with the scars littered across his teacher's body. Izuku felt the breath the older alpha essaying, his smirk widening in response. He pressed a firm hand to the clothed Urkton, drawing a strangled groan from the older male. "Sheet!" Yuta gasped involuntarily, his knees feeling a little weak from the treatment Izuku was putting him under. He got his breaths off as quick as he could, no longer giving a DMN about the false pretense of being unaffected. The teacher broke free from the other's joining hands and backed his student up onto the bed, collapsing the two of them on it. Yuta framed the younger alpha with his body, using his elbows to keep his entire weight from leaning onto the younger teen. He leaned down to press a kiss to the other's lips, renewing their battle for Demps. Yuta breathed, his tongue battling Izuku's. The younger teen tasted of something sweet, reminding him slightly of marshmallows. Izuku ran his hands up the other's back, feeling the firm, flexing muscles. He growled, his arousal hitting him harder than ever. He hooked a leg behind the older alpha's knee and casually flipped the two of them over, this time him being the one on top. The green-haired teen clicked his tongue, realizing his teacher had left his briefs on. "You didn't finish the job," he said, pressing his lips to the other's neck, sking a hickey just under the man's jaw. Izuku's hand made its way up his teacher's torso even as the other traveled down to relieve the older alpha of his briefs. Yuta tried his best to smother his gasp as Izuku flicked a NPL. The gasp escaped him anyway when the same hand scratched the nub lightly. The teen's inner alpha rumbled in appreciation at how the older man was reacting so prettily for him. He pumped the Urkton in his hand as a reward, keeping the pace slow and steady. Shuta's head thumped back onto the pillow as his student's hand drove him insane. He subconsciously threw his head to the side as the pleasure wrecked his body, his student not giving him time to think. Whatever his inner alpha was screaming at him. This felt too good to even try and resist. Izuku immediately latched onto the pale skin on display for him, biting marks onto the alpha's sensitive neck. He liked and blew at the neck lightly, eliciting shivers from the man under him. The teacher swore in his mind, never having realized how sensitive his neck was. Whenever he had the occasional lover, they were always a beta or an omega, so no one had ever come near his neck. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Yuta groaned. The hand on his Urkton was moving so slowly. He felt like he was being driven to the edge of insanity with the teasing. He felt like his whole world had been narrowed down to that single hand doing wicked things to him. The older alpha couldn't hold back the cry that left him when Izuku pressed a lubed finger into his entrance as he pumped his Urkton. When had he gotten the lube? Had he seriously been that distracted? Yuta felt another blow to his ego as an alpha. The finger retracted, drawing circles around the tight ring, pressing lightly, but not pressing inside. Yuta squirmed at the teasing. He didn't know if he wanted it inside or not. It had been too quick previously and he didn't register much before the intrusion was gone. Yuta felt like screaming when the hand on his Urkton slowed down. He was already as hard as a rock. He couldn't remember the last time he had been this hard. He felt like swearing. Just insert the FNG finger already. Then the thought registered to him. He was going to be the one on the bottom? His inner alpha gave a weak snarl at the thought. Then the finger pressed in, increasing the struggles of his inner alpha. Izuku rubbed the inner walls of his teacher's hole. It was slick and warm. He searched around for the one place that made many alphas submit to him before while he was still an omega. He knew he found it when his teacher jerked bodily, his back arching. Shoyuta felt like mini explosions were happening in his mind. Any longing he might have had to fight back and be the one to dominate instead was completely obliterated. The finger that was inside arched and pressed down on the one spot again, shooting sparks of pleasure through his entire body. Izuku deviously rubbed Shuta's pineal gland before backing off, leaving his teacher a breathing mess. He felt a thrill go up his spine at the sight his teacher presented. He felt himself getting even harder, if that was possible. The older alpha's pupils were fully blown with lust. His mouth was slack as he breathed, trying to keep his sanity. The new alpha pressed bites down the other's front, his inner alpha purring in satisfaction. So cute, Shoyuta. So pretty. We haven't even gotten to the main event yet and you already look this wrecked. Izuku gently scratched a fingernail on the older alpha's slit, his Urkton jerking in his hand, leaking pre-cum. Shoyuta came back to himself a little as the abuse on his PRSTT gland stopped briefly. He aimed a glare at the younger alpha, his cheeks still red. He couldn't stop the bolt of pleasure that shot up his spine when Izuku praised him. Izuku watched, interested as he felt his teacher's insides twitch briefly at the praise he gave freely. The green-haired ex-hero pumped the other's Urkton, watching as the older alpha descended back into incoherency at the increased attention on his member. He scooted down the bed a little, hand leaving the older alpha's leaking pee-pee. Shuta's eyes shot open at the loss of contact on his Urkton, looking down at Izuku. The freckled alpha smirked as he firmly anchored down his teacher's hips to prevent him from moving, liking a slow stripe up the other's weeping pee-pee. Ripped its way out of Shuta's throat as he trembled lightly. It felt so good. Izuku essayed lightly on the older man's sack, causing him to blush deeper as he realized he hadn't taken a shower before they started. It was all Izuku's fault. Izuku made eye contact with the older alpha as his mouth slowly descended on the irked member, hollowing his cheeks as he let the heavy weight of the Urkton settle in his throat. Shoyuta let out an aborted shout, trying to keep his voice down. His hips involuntarily jerked up but was stopped by the heavy hand pressing his hips down. The younger alpha's throat was wet, hot and tight, the vibrations going straight through him to his core. Shoyuta shuddered as the pleasure hit him like a never-ending wave. The moment he started to get used to it, his student changed his motions, throwing him back into incoherency. He couldn't get a grip on his thoughts as every little twitch threw him into disarray. Izuku worked a second, and then a third finger into Shoyuta while he was still indisposed. The moment the teacher realized he had already been clenching around 3 fingers, his body accepting it as if it couldn't get enough. Shoyuta felt the rush of embarrassment gush through him at the involuntary reactions. His body was just too honest. The older alpha felt lightheaded. As things progressed, Izuku's scent had slowly permeated the room, mixing with the familiar scent of his bedroom. Shoyuta flinched when Izuku unrelentingly attacked his purity, rubbing onto the spot hard, as well as deep-throating his Urkton in time. He gasped as he almost went over the edge from the combined assault of pleasure. "Ah, no," the teacher cried out, forcefully stopping himself from hitting a Silmix, his hands darting down to try and push him away. Thankfully, the green-haired teen stopped the moment he heard the words of rejection. "What's wrong?" Izuku asked, pulling off Shuta's Urkton with an audible pop. Shuota's pink cheeks flushed a dark red. He looked away from the pure, earnest eyes of his student, feeling like he was doing something wrong. "I was about to come," he finally muttered, his voice weak. He'd never felt this embarrassed in his life. Izuku couldn't help his lips from quirking into a smile, unbelievably enchanted by how the older alpha was reacting. The green-haired teen leaned up to bite a mark into the older man's cheek, liking over the bite mark. "You can come, though?" Izuku said teasingly, resuming his ministrations on the man's purity. Shoyuta glared at his problem student, still breathing from the amount of effort he had to use to stop himself from coming. "No," he grit out, "if I'm going to come, I want it fed out of me, not like this." Izuku felt a jolt from Shuta's words, his eyes darkening, feeling the familiar Rxel coursing through his veins at a higher pace even when compared to before. Shoyuta squirmed, pressing back on the fingers. As an alpha, he knew he probably shouldn't be enjoying this so much, but if this didn't feel way better than it should feel. He once again wondered if his was how it always felt for the people on the bottom. He didn't seem to recall his other lovers reacting as intensely as he seemed to be reacting, though. The older alpha waited as patiently as he could before he felt the pressure building up to his CLMX again. He gasped, clenching down on the intruding fingers that were wreaking havoc on his state of mind. "Hurry up and put it in already," he managed to gasp out, trying his best to glare at his student. The effect, however, was ruined by how wrecked he already looked, with his red cheeks and swollen lips. His eyes were slightly glazed over with the pleasure he was feeling. Izuku decided to take pity on the older alpha. The heat building up within him was slowly becoming unbearable. He wanted to make sure that Shuta's body was ready to accept him in. After all, he was a lot bigger as compared to when he was still in Omega, and alphas didn't produce slick. Then again, Shoyuta seemed like he liked it slightly rough. Izuku pulled his fingers out, making sure to graze the PRT on the way out, watching as the older alpha's entrance twitched close, as if unwilling for his fingers to leave. Shoyuta twitched, his body feeling strangely empty as the fingers left him. The green-haired alpha slowly lubed up, making sure to apply a generous amount. Shuta's eyes slowly lowered down to look at the other alpha's pages. He swallowed, inwardly screaming. Holy shit! Izuku was just as big as him, who was slightly above average for alphas, and even slightly wider. Will that even fit into me, he thought, slightly dazed. Izuku smiled down at his teacher, engaging him in an open-mouthed kiss. Shoyuta wrapped his hands around his student's neck, drawing him closer. The green-haired teen positioned himself at the unruly-haired teacher's entrance, slowly pushing in. Shoyuta gasped at the intrusion. The younger alpha's PP was large and heavy. The older alpha tried to draw away from the kiss, but Izuku insistently pressed his tongue in, so the wine that he tried to stifle left his lips. Shoyuta broke away from the kiss, breathing as he tried to adjust to being stretched open on the other's Urkton. "Ha, hurts," he unconsciously said. Izuku smirked, biting the other's neck lightly. "You like it though, Shoyuta? I can feel you twitching around me." The older alpha bit back at him at the other's words as Izuku's PP scraped by his PE slowly on the way in. The pleasure and pain were mixing together, slowly coursing through his veins. It felt like his blood was slowly being replaced by the feeling of pain and pleasure. It felt like the axis his world would be off kilter if he didn't have this feeling. Shoyuta shivered as the other bottomed out, holding still. He'd never felt this pleasantly full before. Izuku groaned as he felt the older alpha twitch around his length, wanting to start moving already, but held back to let his lover adjust first. Izuku pumped the other man's weeping Urkton, watching with hungry eyes as the man threw his head back at the increase in pleasure. Shoyuta clenched down on his student's PP, wanting more. "So good for me, sensei." Shoyuta ummed as his Urkton twitched. It seems like he liked being called sensei during section. He never knew that. He usually made it a point not to sleep with his students, so this was news to him. Izuku drew back slightly, before moving back in, ripping a muffled scream from the older alpha's lips. The green-haired alpha reached out with one hand to drag the other's hands that had automatically reached up to try and muffle his scream of pleasure. The green-haired student pinned his teacher's two hands to the top of the bed. "Keep your hands there," he growled out, moving a little harder. Shoyuta tried to fight back and free his hands as his inner alpha rebelled against the order, letting out a low when he realized he couldn't free his hands no matter how much strength he tried to use. The younger alpha wasn't even using his quirk to pin him down, instead using pure strength. Shoyuta nodded in acceptance, the green-haired student relenting his grip on the other's wrists when he received the nod. The black-haired teacher scrambled to grab the bed frame above him as he tried to obey the other's commands. Shoyuta ummed, the pleasure was steadily drowning out the initial pain. He wasn't sure if he wanted that or not. He liked how the pain and pleasure had mixed together to form a unique combination. Shoyuta breathed heavily, throwing his head to the side as his body was wrecked with pleasure, sending shivers throughout his entire body. He tried his best to muffle his cries of pleasure, but he wasn't entirely successful. The black-haired alpha bit his tongue to bite back his scream when the younger alpha found his pew, hammering at it head-on, relentlessly. The tidal waves of pleasure steadying rocked against the dam that was keeping his sanity. The waves crashed just as relentlessly as the younger alpha was doing, slowly breaking down his defenses. The teacher shook his head as he tried to keep his composure. The hands that were clutching onto the bed frame were white with how hard he was gripping them. His eyes started tearing up from the unrelenting pleasure that he was experiencing. Izuku growled. The older alpha was incessantly clenching down on him on each move, as if he couldn't get enough. His inner alpha was purring from the ego boost that he was experiencing from the other's unconscious reactions. The green-haired alpha used 1% of one for all as he moved in, ripping a scream from Shoyuta as it abruptly snapped his control over himself, wiping out any thoughts he was still having. He could only concentrate on the pleasure he was experiencing as everything else faded away. Shoyuta cried out, trying to scramble up the bed as the pleasure he was experiencing was too overwhelming. Izuku let out a light laugh as he pinned the other down by his hips, not letting him escape. "You can take it, can't you, sensei?" he purred out, slightly challenging. The black-haired alpha took a while to register the question and gave a jerky nod. He couldn't stop trembling as he endured the overwhelming pleasure, his whole twitching around the member moving in and out. "FF-, he cried out. He couldn't catch his bearings as Izuku completely dominated him. The younger alpha scraped his teeth on the other's scent gland, but not biting down, causing Shoyuta to tighten up on the younger alpha's PP as he was sent over the edge from all the combined pleasure. Izuku purred when he realized his teacher had come without a hand on his Urkton, a wave of heat coursing through him. He fed his teacher through the aftershocks, and even when he was squirming away, when the pleasure became just too much. Shoyuta teared up in relief as Izuku changed the angle of his moving, making sure not to hit his Piri anymore. He was oversensitive and felt blissed out, but Izuku was still going at it. Being fed while he was still sensitive caused his eyes to roll back as the pleasure went beyond overwhelming. Alpha. The younger alpha came inside when Shoyuta clenched down on him when he slipped and accidentally hit the other's Piri. Shoyuta felt his PP twitch a little in interest when he felt the warm liquid coat his insides. It was a strange feeling. He held his reservations about whether he liked it for now. Izuku peppered kisses to the other's face affectionately, feeling happy. The older alpha felt alarmed when he felt his student's knot start to swell, having momentarily forgotten that the other was in rut. The green-haired alpha's knot swelled, locking the two of them together for an unforeseen amount of time. Shoyuta cried out, his head jerking to the side as the knot pressed up against his Piri, sending shocks of pleasure through his oversensitive body again. Izuku pressed bites to the other's lean neck, feeling like he hadn't left enough there while they were preoccupied earlier on. Izuku brushed unruly locks back as he liked the other's scar under his eye affectionately. When he looked back at it, that had been the day he fell a little in love with the older alpha, experiencing his selfless actions firsthand. He might have acted like he didn't care about his students most of the time, but he clearly cared about their well-being, trying his best to make sure they weren't hurt. He'd been extremely upset at that time, witnessing the amount of damage that their teacher had taken. "How are you feeling, Shoyuta? Was there anything I did to you that you didn't like?" The blush that had died down on the black-haired teacher's face returned with a vengeance at the thought of everything he did while they were having SE, especially the words he blurted out at the end during his post-coital blissful state. He'd never heard his inner alpha so quiet before. "Fine. Great. I wouldn't mind doing that again," he muttered lowly, looking embarrassed. Izuku smiled gently, feeling affection welling up for his prickly teacher. Then, he frowned when he felt the heat building up inside him again. It must his rut be acting up again. He felt his thoughts cloud up slightly, his whole world focusing down on the person in his arms. The ex-hero moved slightly, the two of them still connected by Izuku's knot, pulling out a startled yelp from his teacher. "Sensei, he purred, ready for round 2? Comment. 6 comment. Send gift. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. Yuta groaned upon waking up, feeling aches everywhere in his body. It felt like he'd been put through one of the most strenuous workouts, but it was a good kind of ache. It felt different from every other time he'd had a rut. Usually, he was relaxed, but this time was a whole different level of relaxation. He felt loose-limbed and completely unwound in a way he couldn't ever remember feeling. As his mind slowly caught up with him, his cheeks went a slight pink. Holy F-. Did Izuku's rut really end up triggering his own rut? His rut wasn't scheduled for another 2 months. What was his body thinking, going into rut just like that? He wasn't a hormonal teenager for FS sake. He rolled over, coming face to face with the sleeping teen. He traced features that had grown leaner, become more mature, with just the barest hints of baby fat left in the face. His mind involuntarily played back the last 3 days in his head, causing his flush to deepen. His mind supplied him. He'd definitely been played by Izuku. How the F was that a performance by a version? There was no FANG way Izuku was a version. The way he just casually dominated him? Sure, it might have been his alpha instincts guiding things along somewhat, but the way he just effortlessly controlled the pace? That couldn't have come from anything but experience. Something stirred deep inside him, something that seemed suspiciously like jealousy. Yuta batted it down, telling his heart to behave. What was he doing, getting all jealous over a student? Yuta furrowed his brows when the feeling refused to go away. Something was pinging on his consciousness. It's only been 2 weeks since he last saw Izuku. How could he possibly have changed that much within the span of 2 weeks? Growing up was one thing, but having such a drastic change? The Izuku he knew had been confident in his skills but was still rather unconfident when dealing with the social aspect. The Izuku he had coming onto him 3 days ago was a whole different ballpark together. That Izuku had managed to play him like a fiddle, with the ease and casualness that only came with time. Time that he wouldn't have had in a mere 2 weeks. Escaped his lips involuntarily when a warm hand curled around his naked D-, slowly pumping it up and down. His previously uninterested PP quickly started taking an interest in activities. His hips bucked at a particularly firm pump, his eyes shooting open to look at Izuku. He heard a low chuckle from his student, sounding particularly stuck with his rough, low voice after just waking up. "Morning, sensei," his student purred, eyes half-lidded and hungry. "What were you thinking so hard about?" His PP jumped in his student's hand, causing him to inwardly curse his body for not behaving. Izuku nuzzled his teacher's face, feeling affection and happiness bubbling up within him. He felt rather doting today, which was rather strange for him. As an Omega, he was usually the one who got doted on, no matter what others may say. Omega. Was this some sort of alpha instinct that he didn't know about? Izuku ran through his interactions with various alphas, comparing them with both omegas and betas in his mind. He didn't seem to notice much of a difference before or after spending his heats with them. Was it just him then? Izuku silently put away his suspicions, indulging in his urge to dote on his teacher. He pressed feather-like kisses to the other's face, slowly jerking him off. The ex-hero enjoyed seeing his teacher's face slowly flush redder as his breathing grew heavier. Yuta couldn't help gasping at the ministrations his student was putting him through. He couldn't even censor himself, damn it, and he didn't realize he had subconsciously drawn so close to the other. He didn't even want to move away after he realized what he was doing. It just felt so FNG good. Why did it feel so good? Was his body seriously not satisfied after 3 whole days of SSC? By the time Yuta spilled himself into his student's hand, he had already gone past the realm of consciousness. He found himself in a floaty, calm space, feeling at peace as he basked in the afterglow. By the time he came back to himself, he had been placed in the tub filled with warm water, being gently washed by his student. He tried to take his hand back, wanting to finish washing himself, but was gently stopped by Izuku. "Let me take care of you," Izuku said, his voice full of affection, his eyes gentle and doting. Yuta blushed, acquiescing with a slight nod. He relaxed at the gentle, repetitive motions, allowing himself to indulge in the care his partner was giving him. It wasn't until the two of them had washed off that he realized his inner alpha was suspiciously quiet. It wasn't pressing up against his instincts, demanding that he do something. In fact, it felt suspiciously pleased, almost like it was purring under the ministrations. He didn't feel the need to exert any dems over his partner, nor did he feel the need to growl at being so obviously taken care of. The teacher jerked when Izuku nipped his neck playfully, feeling himself flush at the involuntary reaction, his pee-pee filling up slightly at the feeling. His blush deepened. His body was so insatiable. Sure, he hadn't gotten laid that recently, but why was his body reacting like he'd never been laid before? Seriously, this couldn't be normal. Izuku gently tousled his teacher's hair, drying it meticulously. He pressed kisses to his teacher's face again, feeling happy and sated. Shoyuta cleared his throat, feeling the ache as he tried to talk, feeling embarrassed. His voice was low and raspy after 3 days of miming. He flushed further at the thought. Why do you keep kissing that one spot? Izuku stared at him, stupefied. He hadn't even realized he was doing something repetitive. Where? Shoyuta silently traced his fingertip below his eye, where the scar from 2 years ago lay. Izuku's eyes followed the finger, realizing why. Ah, he said, flushing to match his teacher's complexion. You got that scar from protecting us. The teacher's eyes widened as the implication hit him. He felt a mild sense of disbelief. Surely, it couldn't be? Did he hope? That was the day I developed a crush on you. You didn't realize it all? Shoyuta stared blankly at the teen, stunned. His mind ran through all their interactions, trying to see if there was any indication that the teen showed he had a crush on him. He couldn't pinpoint anything at all. Usually, he was able to tell when one of his students developed a crush, but Izuku had shown no such inclinations at all. Sensei, Izuku said, reaching out to gently brush a hand across the other's scar. Will you let me court you? The green-haired ex-hero squashed the impulse to lick his lips. His inner alpha was purring in satisfaction. I want to court you with the intention of being mates. 7 comment. Send gift. Chapter 7. Chapter 7. Shoyuta stared at his student in shock, completely taken by surprise. He thought that this would be like all his other flings or arrangements. They'd make some small talk, exchange some pleasantries and part ways. He even thought that with the rut haze gone, his student might have second thoughts about what they just did. The teacher felt a rare heat creep up his cheeks that had become rather familiar during the past couple of days. His mind was whirling in chaos. He wasn't prepared for this. What did he say? What did he want? Was Izuku being serious? For all purposes and intents, the teen looked completely serious, staring him deeply in the eyes. Shoyuta needed some time to process this. The neurons in his mind immediately started jumping to decisions and conclusions that he didn't know if he wanted for sure. Was the rut still affecting his thought processes? As a matter of fact, was the rut still affecting Izuku? He knew alphas didn't always make the most stellar decisions when they were still being influenced by their hormones. Shoyuta subtly liked the inside of his teeth. He somewhat did want to allow Izuku to court him. What was he even thinking? He was a teacher for FS sake. Sure, it wasn't illegal, but he had always held himself up to the highest standards so that he could set a proper example of his students. His inner alpha was being surprisingly silent, but then again, it had been thoroughly fed into SBMSN the past couple of days. Not that it wasn't pleasurable. It had been highly, unimaginably spine-tingling beyond all expectations. He'd never quite seen what all the hype about SEC was, but with Izuku he almost felt like he could understand. Emphasize even. Did he want to do it again? But did he want to get into what could be a committed relationship with his student? Shoyuta wanted to be able to say that he didn't, but the feelings that he'd been desperately suppressing before came gushing out like a tidal wave. It was like watching a train wreck. He wanted to stop it, but he couldn't, nor could he look away from the process. Shoyuta was jerked out of his thoughts when he felt Izuku's touch lightly tracing over his abs. The black-haired teacher tried to ignore his student and put his thoughts back into order, but his mind kept drifting to the distracting shivers Izuku's fingers kept giving him when they brushed over a sensitive spot. Shoyuta growled as his thoughts were disrupted once again, letting out a gasp as a finger brushed over his NPL, sending a wave of Rxel through his body. "Stop it," he grit out. "I can't think with you distracting me like that." He took in the mischievous look in the green-haired teen's eyes, suddenly realizing that the other was doing this on purpose. Shoyuta growled, rolling the both of them over so that he was on top, pinning down the distracting teen. His eyes involuntarily traced the tongue that darted out to lick pink lips, unable to rip his gaze away. "Maybe I don't want you to think, Aizawa-sensei. Maybe I just want you to feel. Feel how good I make you feel. How good I can make you feel. Today, tomorrow. Every day, whenever you want it, however you want it." Shoyuta didn't bother to fight the shudders that went down his spine, feeling the heat pooling low in his groin, Izuku's words sending a surprisingly large wave of heat through him, considering that they should not be affected by the rut any longer. Of all the things he could have learned today, it should not have been this. In fact, there hadn't been the slightest inkling that this would be something his student possessed. Or had it been there all the time, with no one else ever realizing? Midoriya. Izuku. Doesn't play fit. It was a mix of his stubborn nature and utter determination with a dash of desperation and pleading. And Shoyuta. Demenit Shoyuta couldn't bring himself to resist. One look at those green eyes and freckles sent him caving down like a stack of dominoes. The funniest thing was, if he ever mentioned this to anyone else, he was sure he'd be met with disbelieving gazes. He could even imagine it now. Midoriya Izuku? Deku? The boundless hero doesn't play fair? What are you talking about? He's practically the definition of fairness. Shoyuta gasped as a knee made its way in between his legs, rubbing him with just the right amount of friction. Definitely doesn't play fair. Izuku flipped his teacher over, his alpha instincts roaring at him. He wanted to play. He wanted to press his teacher down and shake that blank look from his face. He wanted to lick his teacher's scar while his cheeks were still red. Wanted to make Shoyuta tremble from the exertion and make him but he reined himself in. It wasn't the time for that yet. He wasn't really going to push Shoyuta into making a decision he would regret, but he wanted to tip the odds in his favor for a bit. He wanted to remind the other alpha on a subconscious level what he would be able to offer him, perhaps appeal to the other's inner alpha a little. Izuku pressed a lingering kiss to the other's lips, allowing his feelings to feed into the gaze he looked at his teacher with. He hoped Shoyuta said yes. He didn't do anything else, letting his ex-teacher. Izuku paused, mentally correcting himself. Letting his teacher process everything. This was going to take some getting used to. Everything still seemed rather different. He wasn't sure if he should hide it. Izuku ignored his knee-jerk reaction to hide and conceal everything. He didn't doubt that it would probably come out at the worst possible time should he try to, and he didn't really want to, no matter what his brain was screaming at him. If he wanted to get into a relationship with his teacher, he should come clean so that it wouldn't affect their relationship, if they did have a relationship. He didn't want to be in a relationship with such a big lie hanging over their heads. Doing so would just be disrespectful to his partner. Izuku took a deep breath to steady his thoughts, opening his mouth. Unfortunately, his teacher opened his mouth at the same time. "Yes. Aizawa-sensei, Izuku started to say, before his thoughts screeched to a halt as his mind haltingly processed the single word his teacher let out. Shoyuta watched as Izuku's expression became pained, not quite expecting that reaction. This didn't seem like the happiness that his acceptation should have elicited. Unless? The black-haired teacher's heart gave a loud thump. Don't tell me he's already regretting it? Since. Hear me out first, Izuku interjected, easily reading the various emotions playing out on his teacher's face. He knew what his expression might have caused, and he kicked himself, not liking that his teacher was doubting himself. He struggled to contain the wild joy that filled him with just a single word from the other alpha. This doesn't have anything to do with you, but with me. Izuku hurriedly continued on before his teacher's expression could worsen. If you still want me after this, then I'll be more than happy, but only if you know everything first. Shoyuta puzzled over the words, getting the feeling that whatever Izuku was talking about was the drastic change that had happened to him. He still got the same vibes from Izuku, but there was something different, mainly in terms of confidence, But how could he possibly have undergone such a drastic change in a few short days? I'm from the future. What? Comment. For comment. Send gift. Chapter 8. Chapter 8. Izuku bit the inside of his cheek, feeling nervous. With 4 simple words, he already felt like he was losing the majority of his courage. Would his Shoyuda even believe him? Even for a people who had quirks, transmigrating bodies, or somehow hopping dimensions was pretty unbelievable. Watching the disbelieving expression that shone in his teacher's eyes, he struggled to explain himself in a way that made sense. Okay, I'm not specifically from the future. I'm from a future, but not the future of this world. Possibly? I'm not too sure yet, since I haven't been here that long. I haven't been able to make sure of all the subtleties, so you could say that I'm actually from an alternate dimension? Or perhaps it would be better to say a parallel dimension. Izuku carefully watched Shuda's face for any change in expression, but was ultimately disappointed. There seemed to be a lot of similarities in my dimension as well as this dimension, but personally, the reason why I knew it was a parallel dimension and not the past was because I'm an alpha here, the dimension hopper said, blurting everything out in a single go. He was afraid that if he didn't say everything at once, he might end up losing the courage to say anything altogether. The green-haired teen tried not to show any signs that he was feeling perturbed. He looked into the messy-haired teacher's eyes, trying to show his sincerity. He watched as Shoyuda ran his thoughts and ideas in his mind. It was honestly quite mesmerizing. The closer you stared at Shuda's eyes, you realized that they weren't a pure black, but an extremely dark shade of gray. They were flecked with lighter shades of gray, creating a whole kaleidoscope. Shuda's eyes flickered slightly. Izuku resisted the urge to swallow, his inner alpha growling at him not to show any weaknesses if he wanted Shoyuda to believe him. He still felt slightly nervous, but he knew there was nothing he could do. He had no evidence, nor did he have anything that he could use to prove what he said without a doubt. In fact, Izuku himself still felt slightly disbelieving. He'd ended up spending his first rut with Shoyuda, whom had been his longtime crush. His heartbeat suddenly sounded very loud in his ears as he remembered the way Shuda's eyes had glistened as he lay under his body, the sound of Shuda's little cries that he tried to muffle. The way Shoyuda bit his lips trying to muffle the little sounds he made. Izuku shook his head, his face pinking slightly. Now wasn't the time to be thinking of this. Deepening this new body. It was throwing all his reactions out of whack. He didn't know what to expect. Hearing about and experiencing was a whole different thing altogether. The teen waited patiently for Shoyuda to get his thoughts in order, ready to answer whatever questions the man had. He didn't know if he would be able to answer them or not, but Izuku would try his best. He owed him that much. Izuku felt slightly apprehensive. Trust was an important factor in a relationship, and if they wanted this to work, then they had to get this out of the way first. The ex-pro hero felt slightly bad that he was using this as a way to test his teacher, but he had to know. He couldn't shove away that little voice in his head unless Shoyuda showed him something that he could use to shut it up. The voice was a mix of his new alpha consciousness as well as a mix of his old omega instincts. It was very confusing. He didn't quite know what he wanted. It felt like the moment he made up his mind, something new came along and changed his mind again. It was greatly confusing, and it was causing him to feel off balance now that his immediate rut was over. Izuku fought with the voice, trying to give himself a little room to think. He didn't know if Shoyuda had seen the struggle within him, because he finally spoke up. Since you said, I'm an alpha here, I assume you were an omega in your previous life? The way you seduced me so skillfully can only be attributed to you being an omega previously. Some of the actions you made unconsciously back then, now that I think about it, make sense with the explanation you're giving me. Izuku fought down a rare case of his delicate omega reflex, also known as a blush, feeling a once-in-a-blue-moon feeling of shyness at the description of how deviously he previously acted. The green-haired teen had actually fallen so far from the typical omega scene stereotype that people had speculated what his secondary gender really was. He had been described as unnaturally aggressive for an omega, and Izuku didn't know if that was because other inheritors of One for All had been alphas or betas as well, so he tended to disregard any stereotypes about secondary genders in general. If that really was the case, I can see why you would be convinced that you're in an alternate or parallel universe instead. Other than that, I can see that your personality underwent changes that can be attributed to growing up, like every other teen. Shoyuta paused in his musing, a gentle smile breaking out on his face. You've grown up well. Izuku's eyes zeroed in on Shuta's gentle smile. The green-haired teen had never seen such a gentle smile on his teacher's face before. It made him want to push the other man down and ravage him. Izuku stopped himself there. The sense of relief he felt was almost overwhelming. The little blush on his face exploded into a full-blown one. He was so glad Shoyuta really did trust him. This meant that whatever future relationship that they tried to build had a good chance of working out well, and Izuku could feel his quirk activating by itself. Izuku tried to fight down his smile, but he really couldn't. Being around Shoyuta made it hard for him to control his feelings. Being in the midst of PBRI was not fun. He cried inwardly, cursing his hormones for causing him to be this out of control. He did not miss being in PBRTY at all. He hadn't lost control of his quirk like that since he was a teenager. Well, technically he was a teenager again now, but he should have better control over it, damn it. He'd kept his quirk to the absolute minimum when he had been having his rut with Shoyuta. He didn't want his quirk to influence the way the man felt about him. It felt too much like taking away one's free will and clouding another person's judgment for him to use it in a situation where he would spend his heat or rut with someone. It would have made him feel dirty using his quirk that way, not to mention that his partner would probably feel violated. Izuku groaned when he realized Shoyuta had a slightly dazed expression on his face. That was so embarrassing. He waved a hand in front of Shuta's face, hoping to snap him out of it faster. Unfortunately, he'd probably used his quirk full blast on the other man in the midst of his happiness. Izuku buried his face in his hands. He couldn't believe this was his life. People usually looked cool and suave when they confessed to someone, but here he was, making a fool out of himself. What was that? He heard Shoyuta say, still sounding somewhat out of it. Izuku buried his face harder in his hands, not quite able to stop himself from feeling sheepish and embarrassed. There's something else I haven't mentioned, he said, voice muffled from his hands. You know how I actually inherited one for all from All Might? Well, it turns out I'm actually not quirkless. The green-haired alpha finally buried his emotions, getting serious. This required his whole attention. He lifted his face, staring Shoyuta in the eyes to convey his seriousness. There actually aren't any quirkless people. Everyone possesses a quirk. The currently known quirk types are emitter, transformation, and mutant types. In the far future, scientists will discover that another type of quirk exists. They call it a passive type of quirk. That's the type I have. Everyone who currently falls into the category of quirkless right now actually possesses a passive quirk. Shoyuta was staring at him in great interest. Izuku could see his mind whirling over the facts, trying to determine if this was true or not. He looked slightly frustrated. Izuku could understand why. In recent years, the amount of quirkless people had drastically fallen due to the combination of many quirk types. As All Might said, it was harder to find someone who was quirkless nowadays. It was likely that Shoyuta didn't know anyone other than him and All Might, and just the two of them weren't enough for him to make any substantial conclusions. You saw flowers blooming around me, right? Izuku asked, feeling a tinge of embarrassment. Why did his quirk sound like it came out of a shoujo manga? Shoyuta nodded. I call my quirk charm. Because when I smile, I tend to activate it unconsciously. Most of the time, I'm able to control it rather well. Or rather, it has always been running on a low voltage, but when I really want to, I can affect a person's emotions and thought processes. Of course, I usually have my quirk on the lowest possible setting unless I need it against a villain. Did you use it against me previously? Izuku flushed, fidgeting. He felt like he didn't know what to do with his hands. Maybe a little more than usual, he confessed, waiting for Shuta's judgment. Shoyuta smirked. So devious, he teased. He wasn't afraid that Izuku had done anything to his thought process. He already had those feelings before this, just that he might have been able to hold onto his self-control better had Izuku not used his quirk against him. Izuku pouted, but felt relieved that the other man wasn't blaming him. We call it passive quirks because it can't be turned off, just like mutant types. Passive quirks can still be disrupted, and we're able to control how much of it we use, but we can't ever stop using it, unlike emitter and transformation types. In a way, we're like mutant types, but our quirks are all classified as a mental type instead of physical, like two sides of a coin. Shoyuta hummed, running through things in his mind. Some things clicked into place, and he wasn't sure how he had missed it. Then again, the quirks seemed to be exceedingly subtle, so it wasn't surprising that no one had made a discovery just yet. The black-haired man hadn't noticed, but whatever doubts he might have had earlier about Izuku's words had been completely blown away. He'd always known that Izuku couldn't lie to save his life, so it might have affected how he thought about it a little. "This is actually the reason I was looking for you a few days ago," Izuku said, feeling the embarrassment creeping up again. "I was going to ask for a few days' leave from school." Shoyuta smirked. He knew why Izuku looked embarrassed. It had probably been hell on him having his inner alpha react like that. They needed to work on his self-control. "I was going to try and jump-start the research about passive quirk types. A lot of people would get help sooner, and some of the villains that appeared later on were actually due to the unfairness that they faced while they were classified as quirkless." The teacher ran things through mentally before his mind stumbled. "Wait, what type of quirk does All Might have then?" Izuku's eyes brightened. Zero comment. Send gift. Chapter 9. Chapter 9. Izuku had been waiting for the other man to comment about this, and now that he has, Izuku could finally let loose and voice his thoughts. Shoyuta was one of the man's friends, no matter how he tried to deny it. They might not get along due to conflicting thoughts about teaching styles, but both men still thought of the other as a friend. The green-haired teen wanted to help his mentor so badly, and he wasn't too late yet. He could still help. Toshi was still alive here. Toshi has a passive type quirk that we call belief. From what we discovered so far, it seems like Toshi's quirk works based on his subconscious beliefs. For example, Toshi believes that his smile would help those in need find peace and security. Well, those distressed people would be more inclined to believe in that smile and find themselves more secure. Izuku trailed off, letting Shoyuta come to his own conclusions about Toshi's quirk. "So, if say, Yagi subconsciously thinks that his injury won't heal, then?" "That's right. That's what's been holding him back the entire time. If Toshi had, on a subconscious level, believed that his quirk would heal no matter what, then his injury would have been completely gone." "I see. This brings up a lot of possibilities. Yagi would be able to continue his hero career, as he's always wanted." Shoyuta said in a sharp inhale. "This changed many things. There would be a lot of chaos if this wasn't handled properly." Even at the thought of all the trouble, Shoyuta couldn't quite bring himself to be worried just yet. He felt happy that his colleague would be able to go back to being a hero. He had seen how the weight of the world seemed to rest on Yagi's shoulders after he was no longer able to use his quirk. "You help me, sensei?" Izuku said, putting a hand on Shuta's thigh. He tilted his head questioningly, causing Shuta's eyes to lock on the other's neck. He directed sparkling eyes at the other man, beaming a smile. Shoyuta swallowed, his throat suddenly feeling dry. He made an incoherent sound. He used his hand to block his view of the other's face, pushing him back, causing Izuku to collapse to the bed with an oof. Izuku playfully scowled at the other man, feeling happy that he was able to affect the other alpha so. "Don't do that, brat. I would have agreed even without you using your omega wiles on me," Shoyuta said dryly. "Also, alphas don't tilt their head like that. Ever." Realization dawned on Izuku. So that was what the weird feeling he got from his inner alpha was. His mind and his new alpha self had conflicted with each other, two instincts clashing. The green-haired teen mused, thinking about how wholly different secondary genders were. Though, he didn't think that what he'd learnt from being an omega would affect him too much here. His alpha scaling was quite literally off the charts. He doubted that another alpha would be able to affect him too much, but it never hurt to adhere to his instincts. Sometimes, whatever you couldn't explain had a way of being right at the oddest of times. Though, I won't allow you to miss any classes. Izuku gawked at him. What? I don't think I'll be able to finish doing everything just after classes. I'd have to split the work up. Shoyuda gave the teen a dry look. If you haven't realized, even I knew that something was rather off with you the moment we met. We don't want you to do anything that seems too out of character. It might alert several unknown factors. We don't want to get a hold of such information. Being discreet is the key, Shoyuda said, pausing. Besides, you have me. We can split up the work between the two of us. I might not be able to help much, but I can still help. I do have connections after all. The green-haired teen inwardly felt warm at the amount of trust the other was putting in him. That's right. He'd been so focused on being able to accomplish as much as soon as possible that he had put aside the risk of being discovered by villains that might want to destroy any of such notions. Izuku lightly chastised himself. As always, he ended up getting ahead of himself. Even years of being a hero hadn't fixed that habit completely. Good thing he had Shoyuda now. Izuku tackled the other to the bed, aggressively rubbing his cheek on Shuda's. The teacher's beard scratched him slightly, but it was a feeling that he associated purely with Shoyuda in the past couple of days. You're the best, Shoyuda. The black-haired teacher smirked, his inner alpha purring from having its ego stroked. Shoyuda was already pretty sure that his alpha had already ended up submitting to Izuku's sometime within those 3 days that their rut had lasted, but he would be dead if he made it easy for the problem child. He wanted to see what the other would bring to the table during their courting. Looking forward to it, in fact. The other might have dominated him in all ways during their rut, his alpha wholly unable to fight back at all, but he would be dead if the same thing applied outside the bedroom. He wanted to be equals, a way that he'd never felt in any of his other relationships, be they long or short. Shoyuda had always been the one who had protected, but he wouldn't mind being protected by Izuku, so long as he allowed him to return the favor every once in a while. The way Izuku had dominated their entire rut left him feeling slightly breathless at the casual control and depths hidden within that body. Something about Shuda's expression or scent must have given him away, because Izuku abruptly let out a growl. Shuda's heart started beating hard at the sight of Izuku's slightly wild eyes. The green-haired teen's eyes were dark and half-lidded with hunger. I was 29 before I came back, Izuku said, his voice low and gravelly. Shoyuda shuddered at the sound. That made sense, he thought, batting down the irrational jealousy at the various other lovers. Izuku must have had to have such prowess in bed. Well, at least Shoyuda had peace of mind knowing the other wasn't technically still underage. Mentally, that is. Then, lips landed on his neck, nipping and biting at several sensitive spots, causing him to gasp as a wave of pleasure crashed over him. Shoyuda stopped thinking. Zero comment. Send gift. Chapter 10. Chapter 10. It's only been 3 weeks since the first time he fell for Izuku's little scheme, but Shoyuda already felt like Izuku was going to kill him with all of the flirting he was doing. During class, he could feel the heavy weight of the green-haired teen's intense gaze, only for it to disappear when he turned around to look. The coy looks the other shot him when they passed each other in the hallways, with widened big green eyes and a slightly pouty bottom lip. It made him burn all the more knowing what the other was truly like in bed. The other alpha was slowly but surely driving him insane. In a place like UA, it was impossible for the changes to go unnoticed. He was sure the brat's friends, at the very least, had noticed something off about their friend after their return from their short break. He was still the same, yes, but he came across as just that much more confident and carried himself with an alluring maturity that shouldn't have been possible to take place in that short amount of time. If Shoyuda wasn't completely confident that Izuku was now courting him, he would be jealous at the smitten looks everyone else was sending his lover, but the fact stood that he was in fact currently somewhat in a relationship with the green-haired teen, ambiguous as it may be for now. He was certain that the teen hadn't received this many love-struck looks a few scant weeks before, so it was this change in Izuku that left everyone on a love-induced high. Or maybe it was Izuku's quirk. That could be it too. Regardless, Shoyuda had never thought of himself as the jealous type, nor would he have been, if his lover didn't have so many lustful gazes staring after him. The teacher huffed, feeling oddly miffed. He chalked it down to his inner alpha not liking that he had to share his partner in any way. Maybe he should give in and let Izuku court him publicly. Shoyuta furrowed his brows as his reason warred with his emotions. As he thought things out, he caught sight of Izuku walking down the hallway alone. Strange, he thought to himself. Most of the time, he was surrounded by Alpha, Beta, and Omega alike. It seemed like no one could resist his charm. Shoyuta subconsciously slowed down his walking speed, waiting for Izuku to approach, his guard instantly up, wondering what the other teen was up to this time. Izuku was steadily approaching him when all of a sudden, a younger student that he didn't recognize appeared from around the corner, calling, "Izuku-senpai," while he grabbed the green-haired teen's hand, blushing shyly. Shoyuta felt the sound of his rationality snap. He twitched, trying not to show anything. His hand wanted to fist itself, but he struggled to maintain his nonchalant image in front of a student he didn't know. The adult trapped in a teen body somehow managed to send the other off without hurting his feelings, slightly impatient as his potential mate appeared in his sight. The other was close to giving in soon, he could tell. As he closed in on the other alpha, Izuku felt a giddy shiver make its way up his spine. He struggled to hide his elated grin. Shoyuta was making a face like he was in between the line of sanity and insanity. He was giving off a low-throbbing, subtle pheromone that spread through the air, almost as if he was about to go crazy with jealousy. Izuku reeled his inner alpha in. It wasn't the time for that yet. Shoyuta didn't know how Izuku got rid of the other student, but the next thing he knew, he was being backed up against a door in an empty classroom that wasn't used by the rest of the school. He stared at the green-haired teen blankly, not quite sure what he was feeling. He rubbed a hand over his heart, feeling his inner alpha snarl possessively, screaming he's mine and pace around uneasily. It wasn't something that he'd felt in such great intensity before. Izuku let out a low growl of satisfaction, both parts of his former Omega and his current Alpha purring possessively at the fact that their mate would soon be theirs. It set alight a primal part of him that he had been successfully suppressing during their short courtship. He'd done his best to keep things platonic during their courtship, as per generally accepted by the common populace as the standard model of courtship, but he could feel himself longing for Shoyuta more and more as the days slowly went by. Shoyuta shivered at the sound he'd been dreaming of the past 3 weeks. He swallowed, his throat dry. Abruptly, he realized that he was now slightly shorter than Izuku. He hadn't noticed with the gradual changes, but Izuku's height had shot up in correspondence with his secondary gender's emergence. The black-haired teacher wrapped his arms around the teen's waist, pulling him in to steal a kiss but was blocked with a hand. "You can't, Shoyuta. We're still in the midst of a courtship, and you know that means no SXL conduct before we're officially mates." Shoyuta gave him a look of blatant disbelief. Did a simple kiss count as SXL conduct nowadays? "There's no way a kiss counts as SXL conduct," he hissed, his expression darkening. The Izuku deprivation was getting to him. How he lived without the other's touch for 3 weeks, he didn't know. It was practically torture, being able to look but not touch. "Really?" Izuku said slyly. He removed his hand from Shuta's face, leaning in close with his lips almost touching before bypassing the other alpha's lips altogether. "If you think a kiss with me won't devolve into a heated makeout session, then you're dead wrong," he murmured lowly into his teacher's ear. "I won't be satisfied unless I can make a mess out of you." A shudder raced its way up Shuta's spine as his breathing hitched, his inner alpha letting out a whine at the mental image that was provided. His throat felt a little dry, and his heart was beating so loud he was surprised the other couldn't hear it. Shoyuta discreetly liked his lips, trying to hold onto his last line of rationality. "But of course, that wouldn't be proper, so I won't do it, because if I start I won't stop until I can devour you whole," Izuku said, gently removing the other's hands and stepping back, leaving the teacher's personal space. He widened his eyes, giving his teacher a cheerful smile as he ducked his head slightly, purposefully. He was seemingly bashful, his cheeks slightly pink. Shoyuta instantly missed the heat that the other gave off in close proximity. His rationality wavered. He wanted Izuku so badly. He made a small, distressed sound at the back of his throat. So badly that he was prepared to complete their official courtship and claim the other as a mate. The teacher sighed in a small breath. Did he want to go that far already? Yes, he realized. He did want to go that far. More than wanting to possess the other just physically, he wanted to claim the other, heart, body and soul. He'd probably already gone past that boundary long ago when he stopped viewing the other as just a student, but perhaps something more. He was ready for this step. Judging Izuku's reactions, the student had probably been ready from the start, already knowing fully what exactly it was that he wanted, but Shoyuta hadn't been there yet. He silently replayed the last 3 weeks in his mind. The little sheet had been teasing him every day, damn it. Sure, he'd been following all the courting procedures, but there had been certain things that had driven him up the wall. He almost had to physically stop himself from pouncing on the other alpha. Shoyuta let out a growl of annoyance, walking forward to grab the teen's hand, dragging him out of the classroom. Since he already knew what he wanted, then there wasn't any reason to delay this further. Oh, where are we going, sensei? Came Izuku's teasing voice. The black-haired teacher let out another growl, feeling slightly annoyed that he hadn't caught on earlier. More than that, he'd been almost achingly hard the past 3 weeks without Izuku. He felt like he was about to burst, and just his hand wasn't enough. He even resorted to using F-fingers. At that thought, his cheeks became slightly pink with embarrassment. But it still hadn't been enough. Stop acting coy with me, and follow me back to my apartment, he said, leaving unspoken promises. We can't, sensei. Since we're still officially courting. Shoyuta turned around to glower at him. And I'm saying, there's one last step to official courtship. Izuku couldn't help the little smirk that broke out on his lips, having had his fun riling the other up for the past 3 weeks. It seemed like the teacher had finally made up his mind. It felt great knowing that he hadn't lost his touch, and Shuta's reactions were just adorable. The way the other alpha tried to keep him from finding out that his breathing had hitched slightly, the way his eyes darkened when seeing certain actions, all of it was just utterly adorable in how he tried to act like what he was doing wasn't affecting him. The green-haired teen beamed at his mate, subconsciously turning up his quirk to the max. His adoration and love just naturally spilled out from within. He wanted to spend the rest of his life with this man. Comment. Send gift. Chapter 11. Chapter 11, NSFW. Just to clarify, you are in your right mind and have been thinking about this, right? You aren't just arbitrarily rushing into this due to my pheromones affecting you, right? Yes, Shoyuta growled out. He had been waiting for this. Maybe he had tried to draw it out slightly at the start, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt that he truly wanted to spend the rest of his life, no matter how short it may be, with the man, and he definitely was a man, not a boy, in front of him. The black-haired teacher quickly stripped, having no patience for a slow strip show today. He felt like he was about to go insane. Izuku watched with heated eyes, sending sparks of warmth through him as his gaze lingered on the revealed flesh. Shoyuta refused to blush. He was already used to being naked in front of other people, being a hero did that to you, but somehow this was different. This was the mate that he wanted. Izuku reached out to slide his mate's hip bone, unable to stop himself from reaching out. He'd wanted to take his time and take the other apart so thoroughly he wouldn't even know which way was up anymore. He wanted to thoroughly brand his existence into the other man's skin, leave his traces and show that he was off the market for anyone else. He wanted to show just how much he was truly adored, cherished and treasured. This wasn't one of his flings. Back in his world, where he had played around with other alphas when he was still an Omega. He wanted this man. His first crush, his first love. It felt slightly bittersweet. His affections were finally returned. Izuku knew that up to the very end, no matter what he'd tried, Shoyuta had never seen him in this way in the other world. Shoyuta shivered even as he frowned. What was the other thinking about at this time, instead of looking at him? Growling, he straddled the other, tilting his chin up with a finger. He pressed demanding lips to the younger man's, silently drawing him back to the present. They exchanged a hot kiss, Shoyuta eventually relenting under the other's pleasurable assault. He breathed slightly, drawing away. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, feeling chagrined when he didn't manage to keep all the petulance out of his tone. Izuku's eyes darkened, his eyes narrowing on his mate's swollen, shiny lips. He let out a purr of satisfaction that was echoed by his inner alpha. It was almost strange how quickly he had made the transition from an omega to an alpha. Then again, he had never really been or felt like a proper omega at all. I was just thinking about us in my other life. I know you didn't have any feelings for me at all. I could smell it. Shoyuta huffed. That's better. I don't want to compete with myself, after all. Izuku smiled, causing the teacher to feel almost enchanted by the way green eyes lit up and gentled at his words. It was extremely gratifying that he was able to induce such a change in his mate. That expression was just for him. It belonged solely for him alone. The green-haired teen brushed his thumbs on his teacher's hip bones, drawing a gasp out of the other alpha. Shoyuta shuddered, the feeling sending a shiver up his spine. Izuku bucked slightly, gripping his hips to keep him in place as he grinded his Urkton into Shuta's behind, ripping out of the sensitive alpha. FF dash. Shoyuta cried, regretting that he hadn't undressed the other when he had undressed himself. He glared at his mate. He should have undressed too. Why wasn't he following the cues? Shoyuta was already burning with impatience. Off, he growled, plucking at his mate's belt. Izuku purred, relenting a little as he released his grip on the other, teasingly grinding up into Shoyuta, sending waves of pleasure crashing through the teacher's body. It felt like Izuku was branding him with a hot iron. Why don't you help me undress, then? Shoyuta growled with impatience but slid off obediently, obeying his alpha. He made quick work of the other's belt and breathes, sliding them off with a smooth move, dropping them on the floor. He couldn't be bothered with folding them right now. He was just about to climb back onto the bed when Izuku's voice came again. Fold them nicely and put them on the chair. Shoyuta froze. The underlying command in his alpha's voice was sending heat through him. His breath hitched. He whined with impatience. He was already achingly hard. He had been since the moment he had stepped through his apartment door, but he wanted to be good for his alpha. He'd never felt this way before. He quickly complied with the orders, a warm feeling filling him as he finished. He felt strange. He couldn't quite describe the feeling. When he finally climbed back up, he was already leaking slightly. The teacher trembled inwardly at the hot gaze that was scorching his skin, causing his breath to speed up with anticipation. He didn't want to admit it, but he'd woken up from countless wet dreams the past couple of days. Shuta's eyes slowly traveled down the muscled form of his student's body, his eyes widening when he caught a glimpse of Izuku's hard pages. It was even bigger than it was 3 weeks ago. Sure, the teen had shot up in height recently, but he hadn't expected that his D would grow as well. Izuku chuckled at the wide-eyed gaze the other was directing at him. Like what you see? He asked teasingly, enjoying the flush that covered the teacher's face. The black-haired man unconsciously liked his lips. He couldn't move his eyes away from the sight in front of him. Was it strange that he felt the urge to lick an SCK at the large member in his sights? He swallowed at the thought. Shoyuta willingly went down on his knees. Izuku moved to the edge of the bed, sitting with his legs slightly spread. The teacher's heart beat unceasingly loud at the sight his mate made, unabashed in his glory. He was being watched with DMT eyes, sending free zones of heat through his body. He bit the inside of his cheek. Why didn't he know he had such preferences? It must have been because he was expected to be DMT as an alpha. The thought of another alpha, more specifically Izuku, dominating him made him feel like he was short of breath. May I? He blurted. Izuku smirked. May you what? Shoyuta squirmed. May I SCK you off? Izuku purred at the red that graced his mate's face. He was so adorably flustered and unlike his usual self that Izuku wanted to continue teasing him, but he restrained himself. There would be plenty of time for that later. You have been good, Izuku mused. Okay. Shoyuta had followed instructions without any sort of rejection, slightly reaffirming the thoughts he'd been having the past 3 weeks. It seemed like the teacher had a slight domination KNK that he hadn't known he himself had. He couldn't stop himself from brushing red cheeks before tugging lightly on Shuta's locks as the older man shuffled forward, pressing his cheek against the teen's hard Urkton. Shuta's inner alpha was growling restlessly as he liked a stripe up Izuku's large pages. His inner alpha suddenly purred when the taste hit him, causing his cheeks to maintain its shade of red. Shoyuta breathed, shuddering inwardly. Tentatively, he wrapped his mouth around the head of Izuku's Urkten, hollowing his mouth and skin, drawing from Izuku. His heart was beating harder than ever at the thought that he was the one making Izuku this time. A whine built up at the back of his throat at the heavy weight that was settling in his mouth. Izuku groaned at the feeling of hotness and wetness that enveloped his aching member, tugging on Shuta's hair to make him The vibrations that traveled up his pee-pee were exquisite. Gently but firmly, he guided his Urkten deeper into the heat, taking in the slightly glazed eyes that his mate was sporting. Shoyuta choked slightly on the pee-pee that was branding the inside of his throat, tearing up slightly. He swallowed involuntarily, drawing another from his alpha. Izuku forcibly restrained himself from giving too much to Shoyuta before he could handle it, but the way the older man was purring with his eyes glazed and tiny teardrops clinging to his lashes were putting a strain on his control. The older alpha moved his tongue against the bottom of Izuku's pee-pee, swiping against the hard Urkten that sat heavily in his mouth, shivering as he waited for Izuku to push more of it down his throat. When Izuku stayed still without moving, Shuta's impatience flared up again. He whined, pawing at Izuku's leg. He directed a pleading gaze at his mate. It wasn't enough. He wanted to feel all of it down his throat, but he couldn't move his head because of the way Izuku was holding him still. Izuku's eyes darkened at the pure desperation that was etched on his mate's face. He discreetly swallowed, suddenly feeling thirsty at the lust that welled up inside him. How lewd sense. You want me to F your throat? He liked dry lips, giving Shoyuta what he wanted. He slid his pee-pee further down the older alpha's throat after making sure he could take it. The pure bliss Shoyuta felt made itself known on his face. He couldn't control his expressions. His Urkten twitched at the feeling of his mate's hard pee-pee down his throat. It was reaching a part where no one else had ever been before. It almost felt like Izuku was reaching down into the deepest parts of his chest and leaving himself there. If what he thought was bliss before, it was nothing compared to when Izuku started moving gently down his throat. The groan that was ripped from him was entirely involuntary. It felt better than all his other experiences with other people combined. He breathed at the feeling of Izuku's thick pee-pee moving up and down inside his throat, feeling dizzy from the adrenaline as the euphoria crashed into him unceasingly, wave by wave. He wanted more. It felt so good that it was almost unbelievable. It felt so good that he could practically feel his eyes rolling back in his head. He couldn't believe he hadn't discovered how good this felt before. Even when he had Sekidi someone else off, they were an omega, and those weren't as large or as thick as Izuku's pee-pee was right now. Every time his mate moved, he was seeing stars in his vision. That was how good it felt. Such a pretty slot, Izuku purred. His pupils were blown wide at the show that was in front of him. Shoyuta almost looked like he was able to come just from the feeling of his throat being fed alone. Shoyuta whined, the words sending a thrill through him. Do you want me to come down your throat when you can't even resist? Send it straight down to your stomach without you even being able to taste it? Do you want me to come in your mouth so you can slowly savor it? Or do you want me to pull out and paint your face with it? Shuta's unfocused eyes focused a little as he thought about what he wanted. He instantly felt conflicted. He wanted everything. He was conflicted over what he wanted right now. His inner alpha prodded him. He breathed, not being able to get enough of the feeling. Izuku pulled out so that his mate could answer him. "A mouth," Shoyuta answered, instantly missing the sensation. His voice was hoarse, and his expression went glazed again as Izuku slid his pee-pee back down Shuta's throat with surprising ease. The black-haired alpha choked back the whine that threatened to escape as his mouth was filled up again. His hand crept towards his leaking member, only managing to give himself a few pumps before he was stopped. He groaned out a dismayed sound at the loss of glorious friction. "No hands," Izuku said, voice firm with an underlying tone of command. Shoyuta reluctantly nodded, drawing a faint smile from Izuku. He turned his attention back to his mate's thick pee-pee that was rubbing the insides of his throat raw. He didn't think he could go back again. He'd opened a new door that only Izuku could open for him. Izuku slowly gripped Shuta's hair tighter and angled his head upwards before resuming his moves at a harsher and faster pace. The black-haired alpha suddenly felt a flash of something before he abruptly came without any friction whatsoever. He breathed harshly, groaning as his throat was violated even as he was coming, and the joy he felt was everlasting, drawing out his orgasm. How had he ever lived without this? The green-haired alpha abruptly pulled out of Shuda's throat as he came in his mate's mouth, before gently extracting himself and wiping the tip of his D against Shuda's lips, painting them a faint sheen of white. Shoyuda blushed, already missing the feeling of Izuku his throat, but slowly savored the taste in his mouth nonetheless, his inner alpha purring all the while. Izuku watched with dark eyes as his mate liked the inside of his mouth and swirled his tongue like he was enjoying the finest delicacies before swallowing. So lewd, he repeated, drawing a deeper flush to the older alpha's face and neck. Izuku watched the red that crept down the man's slender neck and felt an urge to bite and mark. On the bed, Izuku commanded, moving to make space for his mate, his eyes lit up with anticipation, his mouth carrying a dark hint of promise. Shoyuda complied quickly, already feeling the familiar impatience that was making itself known. He crawled forward and reached under the pillow for the place he kept the lube he had used not too long ago, to his everlasting shame. Izuku's inner alpha purred when he saw the slightly embarrassed expression on his mate's face, instantly connecting the dots. "Open yourself up for me," he said, his voice containing an undertone of lust. The older alpha froze at the words, his flush deepening. Silently, he spread his legs, giving the younger alpha a view that made his eyes darken. He quickly uncapped the bottle, lubing up 2 fingers. Shoyuda buried his face into the pillow, unable to bring himself to show the expression he was making to his mate, an unprecedented sense of shyness coming over him. His breath hitched as he inserted a finger before pressing in the other, stretching himself out. Izuku could feel his heartbeat quickening as he took the sight in before him, the feeling going straight to his PP at how easily Shoyuda was taking his orders. The compliance the other was showing was a turn-on by itself, something about it appealing to him even when he had been in Omega. But there was something almost sweeter about how Shoyuda was doing it, so much so that it set his insides on fire as every possessive longing rang true inside him. Shoyuda scissored the 2 fingers inside him, slowly stretching himself out. He jumped slightly when Izuku spread his cheeks to get a better look, the flush creeping further down his neck. His hole twitched when he accidentally brushed the PRSTT inside him. The oversensitivity made him bite his lips to prevent the sounds that wanted to leak out as his PP slowly hardened. "One more," Izuku purred. Shoyuda paused before disobeying for the first time since they stepped into the house. He buried his head deeper into the pillow before shaking his head. Izuku raised an eyebrow. "If you don't, then I won't be FNGU today," Izuku said, subtly testing him. Shoyuda jerked up, turning around to look at his mate, panicked. "No, wait. I want to feel it." Izuku eyed him, thinking about it. Shoyuda didn't even look close to stretched enough to take the full length of his PP, but then he supposed that was what the other alpha wanted, to feel the burn. Shoyuda watched the younger alpha nervously, his heart beating hard. He didn't know if he would be able to sway Izuku from his decision, but he'd wanted to try this since the last time they slept together. The many times they slept together during their rut, Izuku had always made sure to thoroughly and extensively stretch him out before pressing into him, but the faint bruises and marks the other left on his hips as well as all the other parts of his body had ached and felt good the next day, and the bites the other gave him could have made him orgasm just from that alone. "Okay," he heard Izuku say, filling him with anticipation. Izuku manhandled Shoyuda, pressing him down under him, before reaching over to take the loon and coating his Urkton generously, not wanting to take any chances. He positioned the head of his PP at Shuda's entrance, watching the way the hole twitched with anticipation and impatience. He ran light fingers up the older alpha's sides before finally drawing the other in for a kiss. Shoyuda parted his mouth, welcoming the tongue. That intruded immediately. Izuku liked his way into the hot cavern that was his mate's mouth, entangling in a battle of demps with his tongue. As the older alpha was distracted, he pressed the head of his Urkton into the other's twitching entrance. The teacher immediately gasped, throwing his head back as his vision whited out for a brief moment. He groaned, trying hard to relax and not clench down so that Izuku could enter easier. The burn was glorious. It felt so good that he was struggling not to instinctively clench down so that Izuku couldn't leave. Shoyuta instinctively moved his hips, but they were being held down by Izuku, who had foreseen him doing so. He groaned, wanting Izuku to move into him in a single breath so that he could feel the burn all the way. Izuku's chest rumbled with laughter, feeling the way that Shuta's insides were twitching slightly as he valiantly tried not to clench down on his pages. Shoyuta struggled against Izuku's hold, but he suspected that the other was using a bit of one for all. You didn't want to let me stretch you out, so I have to make sure that you won't tear your insides recklessly. Besides, doesn't the burn feel so much more pronounced as I slowly slide into you? Shoyuta had to concede. The way Izuku's PP was sliding into him inch by inch indeed lengthened the burn that he was feeling as his insides were slowly being stretched by the thick PP that was inching its way inside him. The moment Izuku's PP hit his PT on the way in, Shoyuta couldn't help but clench down hard, his eyes rolling back as the pleasure hit him harder than ever. He squirmed as the PP slid past his PT, sliding further into him, all the while rubbing against his PT. Izuku's PP was so big that even when it was just sliding in, there was no space for him to miss his PRTT. Shoyuta shuddered as he was overwhelmed, his hands involuntarily reaching towards himself as Izuku slid his way into him. He wasn't even halfway in yet, but Shoyuta already felt like he could come just from this alone as the pain and pleasure mixed together indistinguishably, bringing him to heights he had never reached before. Izuku pinned both of his mate's wrists above his head, not letting him touch himself. He wanted to lengthen the pleasure that Shoyuta was feeling and draw this out as long as possible. The older alpha shook his head from side to side, almost squirming to get away from the overwhelming pleasure that was cascading through every one of his senses. When Izuku finally slid all the way in, stopping, Shoyuta felt like an eternity of pleasure had passed. He had no idea how long he was under the influence of pleasure, and it left him breathing harshly as tears involuntarily gathered in his eyes. "You good?" Izuku asked, concerned with the way Shuta's eyes were unfocused. He looked completely wrecked even though they hadn't gotten to the main course yet. It was doing things to Izuku's self-control. He silently applauded himself for managing to hold back even though everything Shoyuta did was undermining his control. Shoyuta nodded jerkily, his whole twitching around Izuku as he finally felt the full weight of Izuku's PP inside his body. He felt like he'd run a sec marathon even though they'd done less compared to what they did during their rut. Somehow, everything they were doing today just felt all the more pronounced. He felt more sensitive than ever. Maybe it was because they would finally be reaffirming that they would be mates at the end of this. "Sensei, I'm going to start now," Izuku said needlessly, his voice low and full of unspoken promises. When Izuku started moving, Shoyuta bit back any retort that he might have made because he almost felt like he'd died and gone to heaven due to the sheer bliss he was feeling. Unfortunately, any pain that he had felt was gone by now, and the pure pleasure could have driven a weaker man insane. Izuku was just too good at dominating him. So much so that he felt disbelief that he could have ever been an Omega previously. "You're so pretty, Sensei." Shoyuta couldn't help but clench down when he was called Sensei, with that tone of voice. Izuku was driving him insane. He seriously didn't know how he'd be able to hear the younger alpha call him that anymore with a straight face. There was no way he wouldn't think back about the numerous times he'd been called that in bed. Izuku unceasingly hit Shuta's PRCT with head-on accuracy, never missing his mark. It drove Shoyuta crazy. The sheer joy that coursed through his body almost made him feel like his body didn't belong to him. It was more like a puppet that was responding to Izuku's every thought and whim. He had almost entered a transcendent state of being. His back arched as he accepted the pleasure that was being wrought onto his body. Izuku caressed, bit and at the vast expanse of skin that was on display before him. The pleasure steadily built up before Izuku abruptly used 1% of one for all, drawing a scream Shoyuta and shoving him over the cliff without any warning as Izuku simultaneously bit down on his bonding gland, drawing blood. He cried out with a voice that was still hoarse from the throating that he'd received earlier, his eyes shut tight as he screamed out, "Alpha, please, please." Shoyuta clenched down harder than ever on Izuku's throbbing PP as he tipped over the edge. Izuku growled lowly, moving a few more times on Shuta's PRD before he reached his release, shooting hot seed into the older alpha's hole, coating his insides thoroughly. He moved shallowly, drawing out his mate's orgasm as well as prolonging his own as he nipped at the bite he'd put on the other's bonding gland. He regretted slightly that they weren't in rut, so he couldn't knot his mate, but there would be plenty of time for that. The green-haired alpha purred when he realized that Shuta's scent had changed to thoroughly reflect their bond status before frowning slightly. Something was off. His eyes widened, realizing what it was that he wanted. Izuku nuzzled at the alpha that was still indulging in the post-coital bliss after his long orgasm, drawing him out of the state with puzzled eyes. The ex-omega tilted his neck slightly, offering it to his mate. Shuta's eyes widened, instantly understanding what it was that Izuku wanted. "Are you sure?" Shoyuta asked. The way his eyes lighted up betrayed his inner thoughts. Izuku smiled at his mate. "We're equals after all. I want this just as much as you do." Shoyuta smiled, undeniably pleased that the mate he'd chosen fit him so well. He pressed gentle lips to the younger alpha's bonding gland before doing the same thing and biting down to claim mutual ownership. Izuku pulled his mate close and cuddled him, biting slightly at the scar under his eye. He draped a heavy arm over Shoyuta and nuzzled at the man's bonding gland, drawing a shiver from him. He closed his eyes, before they popped open again as Shoyuta clenched down on his PP that was still inside his mate's hole. "Go to sleep," Izuku said drily. "Let's go another round. You have to test the first years tomorrow." Shoyuta scowled at the reminder, reluctantly relenting. "Fine," he said. "Tomorrow then?" Izuku pressed his smile against Shochua's bonding gland, drawing yet another shiver from the man as his insides twitched slightly, not responding to him. He made sure that the man drifted off before carefully extracting himself and helping the other clean up before he fell asleep with his mate in his arms. 11 Comment. Send gift. Chapter 12. Chapter 12. Things seemed to look up. When Shoyuta and Izuku finally managed to convince Toshi to try an experimental healing technique on him. Izuku ran around looking for various heroes that had healing-related quirks and finally managed to find someone with a hypnosis-type quirk that was used to help people who suffered from PTSD and other similar traumas. They first waited until Toshi was half asleep before using the hypnosis-type quirk on him. "Your wounds are healing," the medical professional planted the suggestion in the hero's mind. "My wounds are healing," Toshi muttered, dazedly repeating after her. Izuku had to implore Toshi to accept even trying the treatment of suggestive hypnosis, which wasn't even a treatment at all. This way, they would be able to activate Toshi's passive quirk and get him to heal himself. "What are you doing now?" the lady said soothingly. Her voice carried the echo of hypnosis. "Healing my wounds." Toshi struggled a little under her quirk, and the lady placed her hands over his eyes, causing the fight to go out from his body. "Relax and breathe." What? 2. Toshi relaxed a little, causing Izuku's heart to ache. Just how much had his mentor been through to instinctively reject the usage of someone's quirk on him? Shoyuta wrapped an arm around Izuku's waist, nuzzling the mark on his mate's bonding gland. Izuku relaxed a little more at that, looking more assured of himself as his inner alpha purred at the attention that his mate was lavishing onto him in a time of pressure. Likewise, Izuku pressed a kiss onto his mate's mouth. While Shoyuta wasn't as close as Izuku was to Toshi, he knew that his mate still cared deeply about the hero as a friend even though their various teaching styles clashed badly. Since Toshi had his shirt off, they were able to see the wreckage that All for One had left on the hero's body. The man was still so sickly thin, as if he hadn't had a proper meal in years. Izuku's nose felt sour at the thought, but he comforted himself that he was at least in time to save his mentor. He could even get back one for all if he just used his passive quirk properly. The counselor and medical practitioner worked her magic over Toshi, and the man eventually drifted off no matter how cautious he usually was. The moment he fell asleep, the words that had been implanted into his consciousness seemed to work at double speed. Before Shoyuta and Izuku's eyes, the wound on the hero's chest rapidly healed before their very eyes, very soon returning back to what was the optimal state. Izuku felt something choke him up, his chest tight. Still, the happiness he felt was very real. He'd been doubting whether this would properly work, but now that it had, Izuku could finally rest easy. The man wouldn't be dying from his own wounds anytime soon if he had anything to say about it. If he wanted, he could even go back to becoming a pro hero, which Izuku knew was what Toshi loved and missed more than anything else. Being unable to help out the innocents in their time of need was something else that had played a part in his mentor dying as the years of stress and sadness wore against his mentor's heart. However strong he might have been, once the quirk that he'd passed on to Izuku had been all used up, he had not been able to do anything substantial. Sometimes, the other pro heroes even had to save him, which was yet another blow against his already fragile mentality. Now though, his mentor would be able to heal properly and continue doing what he loved. Shoyuda and Izuku brought the man back to Shuda's apartment, watching over him as Toshi slept the best he'd ever slept for years. Toshinori snapped awake, seeing an unfamiliar ceiling. His eyes roved before they locked onto his disciple and his friend, Izuku and Aizawa. Though he was awake, his mind was currently not processing what was happening, so he felt blank and confused before the memories crashed back into him. With shaky hands, Toshinori touched his chest, feeling dazed. The wound that All for One gave him, it was gone. Toshinori's shocked eyes met Izuku's teary ones, and Shuda's hidden relief. Izuku crashed into his mentor, hugging him tightly. He was relieved beyond compare. Shuda's inner alpha growled at his mate touching someone else that wasn't him, but the man beat it down without remorse. It was annoying that his inner alpha was being unreasonable when his mate was perfectly within his rights to touch someone else that wasn't him. Especially when it was a mentor that they thought would die in a few years' time. That Toshinori was now healed was a relief to him as well, because he had seen the unhealthy spiral that the man had worked himself into these few years after passing on everything to Izuku. Unfortunately, there had been little that anyone could do, especially when they all knew what the man had sacrificed to reach this point in his life. They had all tried to help, but those who were unwilling to be helped couldn't be, and their words fell on deaf ears. What happened? It worked, Izuku said, laughing and crying at the same time. Look. Toshinori touched his own chest again, feeling only smooth skin under his hands. Just how? He had visited all the medical professionals in Japan, and even overseas. No one could do it, yet his student was the one who had healed him. Just how? Izuku patiently explained what he'd managed to achieve was all based on Toshinori's own passive quirk. Hearing the extent of which Izuku had gone for him, Toshinori was extremely moved. He didn't hold back the tears at all, crushing his disciple back in a hug that was equally as tight as the one that he had received before. Thank you. Izuku pulled back, grinning. He turned around and squeezed Shoyuda to himself, his joy infectious. Shuda's inner alpha calmed down significantly, appeased now that he had his mate in his arms. Shoyuda smiled. Toshinori stood up and flexed. If Izuku was right, success. Toshinori laughed a booming laugh. Have no fear, for all might is here. Izuku grinned widely, pleased beyond belief, and Shoyuda had a small smile before he hid it away again. This was Toshinori's true calling, and All for One taking it away from him had been a sin. Izuku was glad that he was able to help out his mentor for once. To be able to repay everything that his mentor had done for him over the years was precious beyond compare.